Okay, fine. So we begin. Dear colleagues and guests, it's my honor to welcome you all to our international conference dedicated to the reconstruction of religious buildings in 20th and 21st century Europe. My name is Anke Naujokat. I'm the head of the Department of History of Architecture here at RWTH Aachen University, and I feel really honored and excited to host this wonderful event here at our faculty and at our department. At this point, I'm very sorry that Sabine Verheyen, a member of the European Parliament who had kindly agreed to deliver a welcome address, cannot be here with us today because she's ill. But it is a special pleasure for me to welcome Nazar Kozak from the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, who will give the keynote speech later. And we are very happy that he got the permission to leave Ukraine and travel from Lviv to Aachen. Yeah, welcome. Furthermore, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our conference speakers from 11 different countries. So this is Belgium, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Czech Republic, Estonia, France, Germany, Hungary, Lithuania, Romania, Sweden, and Ukraine. So it's safe to say this is a truly international conference. And there's obviously an equally international audience out there on the screens, which I would also like to welcome very warmly. So where's the camera? There's. Say hello to everybody. The presence of you all is a clear sign that our conference addresses a topic of great common interest, not only in retrospect of history, but also with regard to contemporary questions within our common European framework concerning national and religious identity, and also the terrible war destructions in Ukraine, obviously. The history of reconstruction is closely related to the reconstruction of history. We have known this since the major exhibition on the reconstruction of buildings that took place in Munich in 2010 and resulted in a really comprehensive monograph published by Winfried Neerdinger. You may know that, but it's in German. This monograph has pointed out different motives for the reconstruction of buildings and various ways in which it can be accomplished. Often reconstruction deals with the recreation of an authentic spirit. It may also aim to stress religious and architectural continuity. Frequently, it is undertaken for national, political, or dynastic reasons, or to commemorate particular people or events. In other cases, it just serves to restore the unity of an ensemble or to recreate an urban space. And there's faithful reconstructions, and there's imprecise or blurry reconstruction, only vaguely alluding to the lost original. And there's reconstruction that intentionally goes back to older states or epochs, or reconstruction that negates the previous states at all and results in a completely new building. So when Marcus van der Meulen contacted me first, I was immediately enthusiastic about the idea of organizing a conference that focuses on the reconstruction of specifically religious heritage. And in fact, I think this is the first conference dedicated exclusively to the reconstruction of religious architecture, and the first one that focuses of that period of the past 100 years. Post-Second World War, Germany was a very vast experimental field for the reconstruction of sacred buildings. We all know that, such as Belgium was after World War I. But while both phenomena have already been quite extensively researched, the reconstruction of sacred buildings in Eastern Europe, Eastern European countries has not received equal interest so far. And this is why our conference, if I understand it well, wants to put a focus on their experiences in the communist and post-communist era, as well as after the Bosnian War and now during the ongoing war in Ukraine. And I think this is a really, really nice idea, and I'm very happy to be able to host this conference. Let me conclude with a few words of thanks. My first thanks go to Marcus van der Meulen as the initiator, as the leader and the scientific father of this conference. And I think he put together a really rich program and also took over a great part of the organization of the conference. And I would also like to express my sincere thanks to the German Research Foundation, the DFG, which provided us with the necessary funding for this international event, and to the European Network Future for Religious Heritage, FRH, that has also kindly supported our project. Thanks especially to Jordi, where is he? Marala, no, okay, well. Many thanks also to the members of the Department of Architectural History here in Aachen, Felix Martin for setting up the conference website, Sophie Helas and Ingrid Getz for the administration and financial processing, and Lara Braschow for designing the poster, Benjamin Frevel for taking care of the meeting room and the technical stuff, and also to the team who's taking care of the catering. Thanks again to everybody for contributing. And I now hand over to you, Marcus, to do a very fine introduction to this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for an excellent introduction. Now my part of the introduction, dear friends, dear guests, and dear people watching this online. A few months ago, a village church burned down in France's Champagne-Ardenne region, and by pure coincidence, I happened to be nearby visiting the ongoing restoration works at Saint-Florentin. I'm sure you know it. The village church of Drosnay was a medieval church, a wooden structure. The cause of the fire was not immediately clear. Conspiracy theories quickly emerged on social media. There is no distinction between churches and mosques, temples and synagogues when it comes to that. And I don't know what the cause was, but it was most likely due to old electric wiring. It usually is. On French national TV, TF1, a local commented saying, and I quote, "Ce qui était impressionnant, c'est quand le clocher est tombé." Or in English, what was impressive was when the bell tower came down. Sadly, we can all relate to that. The moment the spire of Notre-Dame de Paris collapsed was indeed impressive. Many saw it happening live on TV. And I believe that the reason why so many people were moved by it, even shocked by it, was because the destruction served as a reminder of what many people fear could happen or has already happened in their own town. It reminded of the fragility of these treasured buildings. The fire that destroyed Notre-Dame de Paris inspired many to create plans for its reconstruction. Some were truly fascinating and others less so. The intriguing aspect, first and foremost, the idea of preserving the building as a ruin, as it was after the fire, was not pursued by anyone, at least not as far as I'm aware of. Architects and students alike were actively thinking about how to restore this historic building. And soon after the fire, the first bold designs emerged for its reconstruction. Quite soon, however, the times of games was over and serious discussions began about how to rebuild this iconic cathedral. The Drosnay village church will be rebuilt à l'identique, a French term used frequently in restoration and reconstruction literature. And you have given us the more broadly English term for that. But what exactly do we mean when we say à l'identique? Quite literally, it means alike or identical. But what does alike mean when we talk about religious buildings, places of worship? Continuity in purpose is one of the things that users think about. For many users, that is what makes a religious building a religious building. But if it were just about purpose, we wouldn't be gathered here today. The purpose of this conference is to explore the motivations for restoration or reconstruction as opposed to the new construction or conservation of the ruin, and how this restoration or reconstruction is carried out. The reconstruction of places of worship after destruction caused by human conflict or natural disaster is one of the key issues in the relationship between societies and their built heritage. It is possible to see destruction as a chance to create something new, or perhaps an opportunity to modify the existing substance. In many 19th century restoration projects, the renewal of historic cathedrals and churches progressed towards a construction of a perpetuated ideal. The relation between historic building and national heritage, national identity, rather, emerged. Europe has changed dramatically in the 20th century as a result of wars, secularization, and the rise and fall of socialism. The Frauenkirche in Dresden seems to be a very good example here, destroyed during the Second World War, preserved as a ruin for decades, and then rebuilt after the fall of the Iron Curtain. And not because there was such a need for a place of worship, because, let's be honest, this is one of the least religious regions in Europe. No, this is a monument, an iconic building, a building that gives character to the cityscape, a building that largely helps create the identity of the city and the region, and possibly even the reunification of Germany. The reasoning why and in what way a historically religious building is restored or reconstructed as opposed to conservation of the ruined state or the rebuilding in a contemporary style form the central issue that this conference aims to address. The conference aims to gain clarity on how the approach has changed in contemporary Europe, thereby framing and understanding the current situation. In terms of historic building restoration in the 20th and 21st century, the rise of modernism and the formation of the Athens Charter of 1933 and the Venice Charter of 1964 are significant, and the NARA document on authenticity of 1949. 94, yes, thank you, Anneli. That has probably been a motivator also for us Europeans to rethink what we consider to be authentic. Is it only material substance? Architects appear to approach this issue of material authenticity differently from built heritage conservationists. It has been argued, as the conservationists in principle assume a historical evolution after the completion of a building and focus on the physical building, whereas architects value the original design or concept. It will be interesting to learn in the coming days if this assumption is correct, if indeed architects think differently about reconstruction than heritage conservationists do. I assume, therefore, the majority of architects, there is no such thing as a fake original, only a true copy. That is not the same thing. Reconstruction is a vague term. It means different things in different languages, I've learned, and to complicate things, it appears to be a fluid notion as well. Often it is a concept between restoration and remodeling, and therefore perhaps transformation is a better word to fully comprehend the meaning, maybe. In keeping with our approach, we consider architectural history to be an essential component of the education of an architect, and that is, I am sure you agree, a process that never ends. Thus, we hope that this exploration will be helpful for anyone involved in restoration, conservation, and of course, reconstruction. The conference's geographical boundary is the European continent, and the time period on consideration ranges from the post-World War I period until today. Given recent events, there is this particular interest in restoration or reconstruction following, following war or fire destruction. Well, I'm overwhelmed by the interest and all the positive reactions that we had in the past weeks, and the online participation is absolutely phenomenal. Thank you for that. I'd like to encourage all those who are attending this gathering online to actively participate. There are several architects and conservationists here present who would gladly answer your questions and engage in discussion. Now, let me briefly give an outline of what we will discuss in the coming days. We will look at different approaches to reconstruction since the end of the First World War, when a major reconstruction of Europe began. Reconstruction, literally speaking, after destruction, but also reconstruction of community and of identity. Perhaps we can assume that religious building, more than any other historic building, serves as a unifier in the formation of a community and the expression of an identity. Today's topic is war. And war is a major topic on our continent. In the past century, we've witnessed 2 world wars, a Cold War, a Yugoslav war, and so forth and so on, and now war on our eastern border. The topic of reconstruction of religious buildings after war destruction is explored in a general manner in the first talk, as we delve into the challenges of rebuilding churches in interwar Flanders. Then Anneli Randla takes us to the remarkable restorations of historic churches in Soviet Estonia. Isn't the religious building counter-revolutionary? Or is there perhaps some kind of reinterpretation? And what was the restoration practice like that at that time? France had its fair share of war-destroyed medieval churches and cathedrals in the 20th century. Think of Reims, Soissons, Noyon. Mathieu Lours will take us to Normandy, where the counter-offensive of the Allied forces of World War II began. I presume this will involve some fascinating examples of transformation involving the preferred material, the building material of the 20th century architect, concrete. The second and last session today will bring us to the past 3 decades. First, the reconstruction of a medieval brick Gothic wonder here in Germany, Wismar. After that, we will head to Banja Luka in Bosnia-Herzegovina to learn from Miroslav Malinovic and Jasna Guzijan how historic religious buildings such as the Ferhat Pasha Mosque was brought back after war destruction. And concluding today is Thomas Albrecht, who will speak about the ongoing reconstruction of the Garrison Church in Potsdam. I think most of us will be very pleased to learn more about this fascinating project. The second day, we will have, just greeting one of our key speakers. Finally arrived. Very welcome, Mara. The second day, we'll head to Ukraine and listen to Sofia Korol and Oksana Heri, who will talk about national identity and church decoration during the interwar period. National identity and reconstruction is also the topic of Jan Randak's contribution, with the fascinating rebuilding of a place of worship associated with Protestant reformer, by the communist regime of Czechoslovakia. It certainly defies a general belief that rebuilding historic buildings is a right-wing thing to do. Representing a nation session is concluded by Gidre Jankiewicz, who will arrive any moment now, I'm sure. And she will explore the construction, adaptive reuse, and finally recovery of an extraordinary modernist church in Kaunas, the interwar capital of Lithuania. After a short break, we will then have Mario Bach, who will speak about a lesser known reconstruction, and I presume will focus on tiles. We then head to Budapest to learn about how, under the influence of changing liturgy, the church interior of Catholic churches has changed, been adapted, and even transformed since the Second Vatican Council. The materiality of the building has changed to allow the function to continue. Tuesday morning is concluded by Susanne Urban, who will speak about the reconstruction of the historic synagogue in Worms. Various aspects of reconstruction come together here. Started without consultation of the believers, it has since evolved and is today, again, a functioning religious building. And that is a reminder to us all to always keep in mind the longue durée. The final session will begin with an expert analysis by Built Heritage architect Mara Popescu, who's just arrived, of the reconstruction of the St. Friday Church in Bucharest. And I am sure many things will come together in that fascinating talk. It will be followed by Karl Magnus Melin, from Sweden, who will talk about reconstruction of medieval wooden religious building. And if I understand correctly, it's not just about bringing back lost buildings, but about bringing back lost crafts, skills, and tools. Isn't that correct? Well, beautiful. And finally, Jacques Meulen will sadly only be here online, but he will surely give a fascinating presentation about the reconstruction of the Gothic spire of Saint-Denis. Jacques Meulen, as many of you know, is very interested in recreating historic crafts, and the reconstruction of this tower is an exploration in 13th century craftsmanship. I'm sure there will be plenty of interesting topics for all of us. But first of all, we will be captivated by our keynote speech, why Ukraine's medieval churches are under threat of reconstruction. And for that, I'll give the floor to Nazar Kozak.
Hello, everyone. And I would like to thank organizers for inviting me as a keynote speaker to speak today on the urgent issues that concerns history and the present. Let me try. The title of this talk, Why Ukraine's Medieval Churches Are Under Threat of Reconstruction, contains a contradiction. The term threat has a negative semantic associated with destruction. In contrast, reconstruction implies a positive act aiming to mitigate the damage. As many argue, reconstruction of building of their components brings the lost heritage back to life and serves as a remedy for the social trauma. The question in this title, in turn, implies that reconstruction might work against its intended goal and cause harm instead of good. Posing this question, however, I do not argue against reconstruction of religious building per se. Rather, I hope that thinking along this line of inquiry would lead us to better understanding of the ambiguity of the reconstruction practices, especially in colonial and post-colonial contexts to which the material which I will cover today belongs. Russia's current war against Ukraine is driven by the ambitions of imperial power to retain influence over its former colony, and as such, it is fueled by a strain of colonial ideology. This strain, currently known as Ruski Mir, or the Russian world, asserts the existence of unique civilization bounded by a common spirituality, language, and historic experience, a civilization that was once split by the evil West and must be reunited under the God-chosen leadership of Russia. The medieval state of Rus that emerged in the 9th century holds a special significance for this ideology. It is from that state Ruski Mir derives its name and its mythology of historic unity. This original Rus, which medieval sources refer to as Ruska Zemlya, or the Rus land, however, is located not in the Russian Federation, but in Ukraine. When the primary chronicle refers to the Rus land, it means a specific territory within a triangle of cities, Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Pereyaslav. All these are Ukrainian cities. On the map, you can see the Rusland marked in dark green, while its dependent provinces, which in the 12th century evolved into independent states, are marked in the lighter tone. The three mentioned cities can be seen as red dots, and the green line marks the current state border of Ukraine. From the colonial standpoint, the current war is also a war for the holy grail of history, the original nucleus Rusland. In professional cycles, this fact evokes a false hope, an opinion that when it comes to Ukraine's medieval churches dating back to the era of Rus, the invaders will spare them. In today's talks, however, I will argue that opposite and unwanted scenario is possible. Russia may destroy and reconstruct these churches rather than preserve them in their historic form. Of course, I do not have any documents that reveal the actual Kremlin's plan for these churches. Nevertheless, I have traced a particular historic pattern of actions which may inform the perspective ahead. Thus, to support my claim about the future, I will refer to the past, investigating how the cycles of what I call destructive reconstructions affected the medieval churches when Ukraine was under Russian colonial rule during the 19th and 20th century. And then I will come to the present day war. My first example is Saint Sophia Church in Kyiv, the oldest and the largest among Ukrainian churches that have survived from the era of Rus. At its core, this is a Middle Byzantine crossing square type structure with 5 apses, 2 tire galleries, 2 towers, and 13 domes. The church was built and decorated in the 11th century and served as the seat for the Metropolitan of Kyiv, subordinated to the Patriarchy of Constantinople. By the end of the 13th century, after Mongol invasion, church authorities left the city and the church fell into decay. Reports from the late 16th and 17th century mentioned trees growing on the church roof, and the building had become accessible to cattle and dogs. The first major restoration of Saint Sophia took place in 1630s, when Metropolitan authority was re-established under Peter Mohyla. By that time, the lands of Rus, you can see these 3 dots of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Pereyaslav on the map with red dots, were incorporated in the Polish-Estonian Commonwealth, a multicultural early modern state where Catholic, Protestant, Uniats, and Byzantine Orthodox Christians competed with each other for power and influence. In his efforts to reassert the Orthodox faith in Kyiv, Peter Mohyla restored the city's oldest churches, including Saint Sophia. In this act, he not just reclaimed the medieval past of Rus, but he sought its further development following contemporary Western models. The drawing by Abraham van Westerveld, dated to 1651, depicts several Baroque alterations made to the original Middle Byzantine architecture. A lantern crowns the central dome, and eastern wall of the northern galleries is adorned with upward curving volutes and an attic decorated with sculptures of knights holding spears. Mohyla restoration of Saint Sophia was interrupted by his death in 1647, followed by Kozak rebellion against the Polish king. The political turmoil culminated in establishment of the Kozak state known as the Hetmanate. On the map, you can see the original Rusland cities as a part of this entity. The Hetmanate broke away from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and came under the Muscovite protectorate. During relative stability around 1700, Kozak Hetman Ivan Mazepa generously invested in restoring Kyiv churches, including Saint Sophia. The church acquired its current architectural form, marked by Baroque features. A second floor was added over external galleries, and the domes took on flamboyant forms. Furthermore, in the 18th century, the old wall paintings were covered with new plaster and painted over in an illusionistic manner. All in all, by the 19th century, Saint Sophia had emerged as intricate palimpsest of multiple historical strata, combining medieval Rus and early modern Hetmanate, combining Middle Byzantine core and Kozak Baroque adjustments. By that time, the Tsardom of Muscovy had transformed into the Russian Empire, which completely dissolved the Hetmanate statehood. Kyiv became a provincial city under total control of the Russian colonial authority. The restoration of Saint Sophia, which these authorities initiated, driven by desire to own the heritage of Rus, led to partial destruction of the original wall painting in the church. In 1843, when a section of the Psalter fell from the church wall, local clerics discovered underlying layer of images that no one knew existed. They shared the discovery with Fyodor Solntsev, a leading Russian artist specializing in historical genre in the service of emerging Russian nationalists. Seeing symbolic value in this discovery, Solntsev outlined a restoration strategy, which actually was a reconstruction strategy. He proposed uncovering the original layer, correcting it with overpainting, and in areas where the original decoration had been lost, interpolating new images. The restoration lasted for a decade until 1853, and as a result of implementation of that plan, not only some of the paintings from the 17th, 18th century were lost, but earliest layer from the 11th century also suffered severe damage. The process of uncovering involved unrefined mechanical method of basically scratching the surface, which along with the later plaster removed fraction of original pigments. Moreover, after the unveiling, the medieval wall paintings were painted over with oil paint that further deteriorated the surface. In some places, new sands deviated from the original 11th century iconography. As you can see on the example of this image of Saint Nicholas, the overpainted outlines subsequently differ from the original that was uncovered later. But here at least we observe the image of the same saint. Meantime, in other cases, the images change their identity. Consider the most striking example of such falsification, the donor portrait of the church founder, King Miroslav and his family, which initially occupied 3 walls in the western compartment of the central cross. The western wall was destroyed in 1700, and restorers in the 19th century recovered only 4 figures on the south wall. Songs have sketched the uncovered figures, depicting them in processional movement while holding candles and wearing luxurious garments and hats. The drawing by Westerfeld from the 17th century also reproduced these figures as figures of the king's sons. But what restorers in the 19th century, what restorers of the 19th century painted actually has nothing to do with royalty and masculinity. They substituted the images of the sons for the images of the holy martyrs. Saint Sophia and her daughter's face, hope, and love. This transformation not only changed the gender of the figures, but also erased a part of Saint Sophia's history associated with its early period. While the intention behind this action remained undocumented, its outcome is clear. Being repainted into female holy martyrs, these images no longer served as evidence of Kiev's status as a seat of power. From the Russian imperial standpoint, Kiev's glory should remain a myth, unattested by actual artifacts capable of restoring it in the present. The 4 figures of Yaroslav's sons were uncovered again in the 1930s already by Soviet restorers from Moscow. Although the press praised the work of this restoration team as uncovering authentic history, in case of the donor portraits, that was hardly so. In the areas of the figure's headwear, the restorers removed both the 19th century oil paint and the original 11th century pigment. As a result, the female white scarves remained on the heads of king's sons permanently. The radiography conducted in the 1980s revealed that some traces of heads are still present on this wall. The restoration efforts in St. Sophia were renewed after World War II. The restorers worked to uncover the 11th century's fresco, but in areas where, in their opinion, the original pigment were lost, they chose to retain the 19th century oil overpaint. You can see the 11th century in more lighter tone and this 19th century overpaint, a darker one. As for the wall painting of the era of Hetmanate, the restorers mostly concealed them with a neutral ochre pigment. You can see here on this ochre pigment on the wallet above the image of the Virgin. Moreover, some of the later frescoes were also removed. In particular, this was the fate of the dedicatory inscription that ran on the arches under the central dome, which informed the viewers about the church reconstruction by Petro Mohyla in 1634. In place of this important historic document, the restorers painted a frivolous imitation of Byzantine mosaic ornamentation. These interventions were officially justified by the desire to reconstruct Saint Sophia decoration as its original form. Yet they failed that task. After 100 years of Russian imperial and Soviet restoration efforts, Saint Sophia medieval wall painting became intermixed with the dark and somewhat crudely executed 19th century oil overpainting that distorted the original appearance of the church interior, while deliberate destruction or hiding the Baroque painting associated with the Hetmanate era resulted in partial clinking the church from the layers of its history. Despite all the negative impact of the destructive reconstructions that it suffered, Saint Sophia survived them. Meanwhile, other medieval churches were not as fortunate. Probably the most emblematic example of fatal scenario would be the fate of Saint Michael Golden Dome Church, an equally important key landmark located close to Saint Sophia. It was built in early 12th century. At its core, it was a cross-square church with 3 apses and a narthex. During the 18th century, this Middle Byzantine structure, which is shown in red, underwent expansion with addition of extra naves and galleries, while its exterior was remodeled in Kozak Baroque style, similar to that of Saint Sophia. In the 20th century, however, the biography of this religious building was abruptly terminated. First, in 1918, during the Russian Bolshevik bombardment of Kiev, then the capital city of the independent Ukrainian Republic, the church endured the impact of 7 shells, severely damaging the south apse and the central dome. Later in 1930s, when Russian authorities decided to transfer the capital of Soviet Ukraine from Kharkiv to Kiev, they ordered the complete demolition of the church. Archaeologist and art historian Mykola Makarenko attempted to oppose the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage. He even sent a telegram petition to the Soviet tyrant Joseph Stalin. The response came instantly. Makarenko was sent into exile and eventually executed. The church was blown up according to the plan in 1937. In addition to St. Michael Golden Dome Church, several other medieval churches in Kiev were destroyed during this decade. St. Basil Church, which was built in the 12th century, rebuilt in 17th and 18th century, was destroyed in 1935. The Virgin Perehoshcha Church, built in 12th century, rebuilt in 18th and 19th century, and destroyed also in 1935. And probably the most famous case is the Dormition Church in the Pechersky or cave monastery in Kiev, which was built in the 11th century, rebuilt in the 18th century, and it was destroyed in 1941. And according to the latest investigation, it suggests that it was destroyed by the Nazis, who detonated the explosives which were planted by the Soviets. The destruction of monuments in 1930s coincided with the most horrible terror campaign unleashed by Stalin regime. In 1932-1933, the Holodomor, an artificial famine genocide, took the life of millions of Ukrainian peasants. And in 1937, the so-called Great Purge, during this Great Purge, thousands of Ukrainian intellectuals, such as Makarenko, were executed. The destruction of the churches of Kiev testifies that the terror was not limited to individuals. It extended to symbols and institutions that were deemed threats to the established Stalin's colonial order. The church's destruction was more than a physical act. It was a deliberate attempt to erase Ukraine's culture along with its people. The story of St. Michael Golden Dome Church, however, comes with a telling twist. The destruction was not total, but selective. This is the ruins of the Dormition Church in the cave monastery, but I will speak back about St. Michael Golden Dome. So here's a photo of its interior before the demolition, and you can see that portions of the wall expose bricks. This is the places where mosaic and frescoes dated back to the 12th century. They were removed from the wall before the demolition of the church by restorers sent from Moscow. The technology of that removal included an element of reconstruction. You can see on the slide the process of detachment from the walls of the larger portion of mosaics. They were divided into smaller segments, and then they were reassembled on the new base, which was made of concrete. And as you can see here, the filling of these lines of cuts was done by workers and with new actual mosaics. So in a way, these were not the same artworks that were on the walls, but partly restored. Some images remained in Kiev, yet many others were transferred to Russia. The most notable case is the mosaic of Saint Demetrius, which traveled for a temporary exhibition to Moscow in 1938, where the Tretyakov Gallery appropriated it with other artworks borrowed from Kiev. A similar fate met those wall paintings that were stolen during World War II by the Nazis. During repatriation, only a fraction found their way back to Kiev. The rest ended up in the Hermitage in Leningrad and the Russian Museum in Novgorod. The case of St. Mikhail Golden Dome demolition is indicative for understanding the hierarchy of value assigned by Russian colonizers to Ukraine cultural heritage. At glance, one can jump into conclusion that while the art of Kozak Hetmanate era was destroyed, the art of Rus era that fit into the national myth of Russia's medieval roots has been preserved. Yet only part of this formula is correct. The art of Rus was also destroyed. First of all, the medieval walls of the church, which were still extant under the Baroque additions, were blown up with no pity. And the wall painting, although removed, but as we just saw in this process of this removal, they were basically turned into their reconstructions. Moreover, the removal detached them from their original historic setting, destroying their perceptual site specificity. This is clear when we compare, for instance, the scene of the communion of apostles in the middle register. You can see here in the apse of Saint Sophia, which is still in situ, and the same scene which was removed from Mikhail Golden Dome Church and reassembled in the gallery. If the first artwork set in its original architectural environment, in its intervisual entanglement with the whole decoration system of the church, the later resembles rather an exhibit in the cultural Disneyland, and the experience of the two are just incomparable. Finally, the Golden Dome case raises the issue of cultural appropriation. The transfer of St. Mikhail's mosaic and wall paintings from Kiev to the Russian Federation reshaped the narrative of ownership and control over the past. In Russian museums, this mosaic and fresco became a part of Russian national cultural heritage display, reinforcing the imperial aspiration toward appropriating the legacy of Ukraine's Rusland. This case reminds us the cultural cleansing is not confined to destruction alone. It can manifest through selective preservation, reconstruction, and relocation of artifacts, which silence the diversity of historic voices and amplifies the colonizer's narrative. After World War II, the destruction of Ukraine's medieval religious building entered a new phase. The demolition of existing structures was masked by the production of simulacra in Baudrillardian sense, that is a likeness that have no relationship to any historic reality whatsoever. St. Paraskevi Church in Chernihiv is a notable early example of this stage. It was built around 1300. This church underwent restoration during the 17th and 18th century in the style of Kozak Baroque. During World War II, it suffered severe damage from bombardment. Despite partial destruction, it could have been preserved and rebuilt. The authorities, however, took a different approach in solving the problem. In the 1950s, the church was demolished, and in its place, architects erected a fantasy building, claiming it to be an exact reproduction of the original medieval church. The reconstruction, however, was not based on documentary evidence, as such evidence from the 13th century and 14th century didn't exist non-existence, but on the architect's imagination. The only authentic element in the structure were some of the bricks, which were intermixed with the newly produced replica. At the same time, the same architectural team carried out the reconstruction of St. Boris and Gleb Church in Chernihiv. The story of this church is typical. It was built in early 12th century, rebuilt in 17th and 19th centuries, damaged during World War II, and after World War II, it was reconstructed to resemble a fake 12th century structure from unsupported by any documental evidence. The critics of this reconstruction argues that when the hypothetical approach to envision the architecture of the past receives a material embodiment in the actual cityscape, it distorts and falsifies the public's encounter with history. Furthermore, besides this distortion, the construction of new simulacra also causes physical damage to the remains of the authentic building. Consider, for instance, the case of the Golden Gates with the Annunciation Church over them built in Kiev in 1982, in time when the city was preparing to celebrate a fake anniversary of 1,500 years, which is not supported by actual archaeological and written documents. For the foundation of the new structure, builders employ concrete piles, which practically obliterated the cultural layer in the area. The metal frame installation further damaged the authentic walls, since the latter was partly sledgehammered to integrate them into the new structure. A decade later, an architect, Natalia Lohven, reported that due to the absence of proper ventilation and permanent condensation of moisture, the authentic masonry was rapidly deteriorating, and the lime cement mortar crumbled at the slightest touch. Furthermore, exhaust gases from vehicles coated the ancient walls with a thick layer of soot. Once again, there was no concrete evidence supporting the forms imagined by architects, but the narrative of authenticity was sold to the public, as if the Rusland itself came back to life. After Ukraine declared independence from the Soviet Union, reconstruction gained further momentum. Dozens of monuments were rebuilt on the old foundation around the country, including 3 important Kiev's medieval churches destroyed in the 1930s. The works on Perohoshcha took place in 1996-1998. Here, the architects adopted the same approach as in the case of the Golden Gates, reconstructing the church in hypothetical medieval forms. In contrast, the reconstruction of St. Michael Golden Dome, which took place between 1997 and 1998, reproduced an architectural forms from the 18th century. This reconstruction process utilized extensive measurements and data collected before the church destruction, and was further validated through photographic analysis. So the result quite precisely reproduced the building that was destroyed. However, within the interior of this replica, the preserved mosaics and the copies of the mosaics and frescoes, which are known, were mixed with speculative reconstruction of entire program based on iconographic analogies from the Byzantine world, but lacking any historical evidence that this specific program was in the specific church. The reconstruction of the Dormition Church in the cave monastery carried out between 1998 and 2000 follow a similar approach to the reconstruction of St. Michael Golden Dome. It reproduced the architectural structure from the 18th century. We can see it's quite similar, and its interior program was also quite precisely reconstructed based on documentary evidence, but with the use of new pigments and materials. So when we look at the slide, what you see is not a Baroque painting, but you can sense that it is modern, that is done currently. The scholarship and the media discourse justified the reconstruction of St. Michael Golden Dome and other churches in Kiev with the rhetoric of the Ukrainian national rebirth. It was proclaimed a symbolic act of healing the trauma of the past. For instance, in 1991, Larissa Skorik, who was an architect and politician, which is quite interesting combination and important for such project, she called this reconstruction a cornerstone of the national spirit. And the decree signed by the Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma in 1995 motivated the need of this reconstruction with the revival of the spirituality of Ukrainian people. But this appeal to the symbolic value rooted in newly proclaimed act of Ukrainian independence represent only one side of the coin. And I will speak about the different side, which is quite controversial. Paradoxically, at the same time, this reconstruction continues the colonial discourse of the past. The idea to rebuild Perohoshcha, St. Michael Golden Dome, and Dormition Church at the cave monastery dates back to the 1980s, when Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union. And the colonial authorities supported this idea and also colonial elite participated in the reconstruction committees of these churches. Unsurprisingly, the Ukrainian reconstruction coincided with the similar wave of reconstruction in the Russian Federation. They emerged from the same ideological source and subsequently intersected in terms of goals. Alongside the rhetoric of national rebirth, these reconstructed buildings were reinforcing the role of the church as an ideological state apparatus aimed to control society. In many cases in Ukraine, this apparatus was not Ukrainian, but actually Russian. Technically, the rebuilt Dormition Church in the cave monastery was handed over to the Orthodox Church branch subordinated to Moscow. In subsequent decades, it served as a channel for Ruski Mir propaganda in Ukraine, laying the ground for the current military intervention. Another negative aspect of these reconstructions stemmed from the post-Soviet economic crisis. This project diverted scarce financial resources from the preserving existing cultural heritage, which suffered substantial damage due to lack of funds. Finally, this reconstruction normalized the city's landscape, as if the brutal destruction of cultural heritage had never occurred. By revitalizing and restoring architectural landmarks that had been destroyed, this project removes the visual scars of Russian colonial rule in Ukraine. Normalizing the city landscape created a cognitive dissonance, presenting viewers with an idealized version of history that concealed the suffering and loss of the past. The attempt to heal these open wounds in the cityscape suggested that the threat of Russian intents toward Ukraine was a thing of the past, but as we now know, this was just an illusion. The cycle of cultural cleansing that impacted Ukraine's medieval churches during Russian colonial rule when elements or whole buildings were destroyed, altered, removed, or substituted with simulacra, continues with the current war. According to the statistic of Ukrainian Institute for Religious Freedom, as of January 2023, at least 494 religious buildings, theological institutions, and sacred places were wholly destroyed, damaged, or looted by Russian military. It's in the first year of war. The website established by the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture registers the damage to cultural heritage and lists now 553 objects of cultural heritage that suffered, of which 171 are religious buildings. On the website, you can search by categories, and religious building is one of them. One of the most well-known recent case is the Transfiguration Church in Odessa. This is not medieval church, it's a neoclassical structure that was built in early 19th century. It was destroyed in 1930s during Stalin rule and reconstructed between 1999 and 2003. On July 22, 2023, a few months ago, a Russian missile struck the altar of the church, breaking the wallets and filling the interior with debris. This church belonged to the branch of the Orthodox Church subordinated to Moscow Patriarchy, but its confessional affiliation and support for Ruski Mir ideology did not grant immunity from destruction. The medieval churches from the era of Rus have also faced attacks, luckily minor one. In the spring of 2022, Russian missile landed approximately 50 meters from the 11th century Savior Church in Cergy, and the blast damage impacted the building structure and damaged the exterior plaster, particularly in the southwestern corner. And the similar incident occurred at Yeletsky Monastery, also in Cergy. Its main church was built in 11th century and eventually rebuilt in 15th and later centuries, but the rocket did not hit the monastery, it hit the residential building across the street, you can see here, and the fragments of munition, they damage the walls of the monastery and also the domes of the church. The summer, fragments of drones were shot down by the air defense as they fell onto the territory of Saint Sophia, preserved in Kyiv. And on August 19, a month ago, actually, the blast wave from the strike on the drama theater in Chernihiv impacted the mention about reconstruction of St. Paraskevy Church located just next to it. On the slide, you can see the dome of the church just behind the theater. There was no major damage, but a few fragments were repaired of the wall, and of course, the blast wave broke the glasses and made a mess inside the church. The destruction of cultural heritage sites, including places of worship, became routine in the wars. These barbaric acts are driven by various reasons, from combat expediency to a strategic erasure of memory, but their effect is always the same. They produce cultural trauma that cannot be healed with reconstruction. Moreover, as I have argued today, sometimes reconstruction can become a destructive tool as well. Medieval paintings were brutally uncovered just to be overpainted with oil paint, as in Saint Sophia of Kiev. They were removed and relocated away from their original context, as was the case with St. Michael Golden Dome, and medieval walls were destroyed and then rebuilt in imaginary pseudo-authentic forms, such as St. Paraskevy Church in Chernihiv. In Ukraine, reconstruction of the medieval churches turned destructive due to the Russian colonial ideology, which aimed to adjust the past to a fabricated blueprint suitable for justifying the colonizers' rule in the present. Ukraine medieval churches confront the viewers with a history linked to the local natural cultural landscape that developed differently from the Tsardom of Muscovy and subsequent Russian Empire. These churches attest that original Rusland, encompassed by the triangle of cities, Kiev, Chernihiv, and Pereyaslav, is not Russia. Because of this existential antagonism between these churches and the colonial ideology, their reconstruction targeted not only Kozak Baroque layer of history, but also damaged their Byzantine core. Ideology always prefers simulacra over historic document, an imaginary model of the church of the actual building. For the same reason, Ukraine's medieval churches, as well as Ukraine's Rusland itself, are now under Russian attack. They will remain perpetually vulnerable to destructive reconstruction until the Russian colonial ideology retains its power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Excellent talk. I think that was fascinating for all of us to hear, both here in the room as online. Are there any questions for our keynote speaker? Thomas, behind you is a microphone. You could.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's working here. Can you launch the presentation one again, please? That's the first slide. Yeah. Okay. You can see here is here. This is Black Sea, right? Crimea, the map of Ukraine, and Kiev here, Chernihiv over here, and Pereyaslav. This triangle. Thank you.
No. More questions here in the room, Mathieu.
Thank you very much. I have a question about neoclassical churches in South Ukraine.
Odessa.
Thank you very much. I would like to have information about the churches in south of Ukraine. So the churches that was built in Novorossiya at time of Catherine II, are they identified as Russian colonial buildings, or how do you integrate them in the Ukrainian history? Because they are Russians in all the effects.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about the history as such, it's complicated and contradictory. And of course, there can be an anti-colonial narrative, which will like to purge all the past from an unwanted element and to build a straight line which shows you a clear transition continuity from Middle Ages or to the present. But in my belief, the history never develops in straight line. It always complicated and contradictory. For that reason, I think personally, as a historian, as art historian, this building attests to the complex historical development of Ukraine and is good as a good evidence that, or I would say, it can prevent us of thinking of the past in, nationalist mythologies that that will put forward just only one narrative. They're actually different narrative. But what is the irony of this present day war? That if Odessa was an important Russian imperial city with these buildings which were constructed by imperial authorities, and now they are still under attack. And this attack is brutal and violent, showing that there's no respect to actual history, that there is only domination in the present would matter. And all the historic strata can be erased and rebuilt, renewed, and tell that it's a part of the past. So you make a good point that this is a way how the history is complex. And these buildings actually is a part of this complexity.
We see Ukrainian nationalists destroying Soviet monuments, and one day will be there risk for imperial Russian architecture churches in Russia. South Ukraine.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The problem with the Soviet legacy in Ukraine is that this is not, I would not classify it as acts of, on the Ukrainian nationalists. It's just a similar situation as with Nazi monument in the Eastern Europe also, because these monuments are not just landmarks, they are associated with the terror and killing of millions of people, because the Soviet rule in Ukraine, despite its communist slogan and the promise of future just society, in actuality was unjust and was and resulted in so many victims. So from that standpoint, these monuments of Lenin in the cities, they reinforce this narrative, and they serve like for the local communities. They does not allow them to move forward. So the removal of these monuments can be justified same as removal of Nazi monuments around Europe. But there is also a thing that this removal never should be an act of destruction, which is actually happened. And this probably is the result that unlike Baltic states, which removed this monument immediately after the Ukraine, after the split of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, the process in Ukraine was moving in an evolving way. There was always the way to keep the balance between different ideological positions. And currently under the circumstances of war, which began not in 2022, but in 1914, of course, there was a radicalization and a way of anti-colonial movement, which was inevitable in circumstances like this. So I think that the removal of the monuments can be justified, but of course it should be done in a proper way, not leading to actual destructions of artworks, which is a pity.
I have another question. I heard of programs of other nations, Europe and America, to support financial aid for rebuilding. How about that? To give us some hope in this terrible story.
Rebuilding, I think from my standpoint, in being in the situation, I heard about a lot about the rebuilding of the country, but currently the problem is not rebuilding, the problem is survival. Because it's when your house is boiling, it's good to talk about the plans of future reconstruction, but you can actually need to bring water and stop the fire. So from that point, I think we need to focus, and actually what is being done currently, that especially by cultural heritage activists, they focus their efforts on preserving the existing cultural heritage, to secure collections, to remove everything to the safer locations, to protect the buildings. Of course, sometimes these measures, their effectivity can be questioned, because, for instance, when you put wooden shields on the windows of the church, they can protect from the blast wave, but they cannot protect from actual hit. So, but anyway, I think it's important that cultural activists focus their effort on preserving what can be preserved right now, and rebuilding. It will be, of course, the question of the future, which we will discuss later. I hope. Please.
In the same sense, my question, do you have documentation programs actually in Ukraine to have scans of the buildings and so on, and how it is organized? Thank you.
Very good question. I think that important thing about this war is it showed that even when state apparatus actually does not have a priority in preserving society and in cultural heritage. It's mostly this work can be done by civic society and by activists and privately organized groups. And currently I know that there are several activist groups which are organized also in Ukraine and abroad that work on digitalization of all the cultural heritage that are extant. They mostly they are funded by private institution, and there probably half a year ago there was a big grant from Getty Foundation to some of the Western European foundations that manage this amount of resources directed to preservation of extant cultural heritage. And I was impressed because I traveled to some provincial museums for my other research, and people there, they showed that they bought some important thing that they needed for their collection for this grant money. So indeed it works, and it's not only works through governmental road, but they actually works through civil society road.
Well, no questions, no further questions also online, no? Then I'll say that we'll take a break for about 15 minutes or so, and we'll come back to you later. Thank you. Good. My talk today will delve into the challenges of reconstruction after the Great War in West Flanders and its encounter of modernity and traditionalism in relation to his dominantly of medieval origin. It will be a broad exploration of the subject of how historic churches destroyed during the First World War were rebuilt. We will look at the 4 places, all located a few kilometers apart in one of the most troubled regions of the First World War, the Ypres, and how these historic churches were rebuilt in interwar Belgium. In August 1914, German forces invaded Belgium, a neutral nation whose neutrality had been guaranteed by Britain. Thus, modern warfare entered the heart of Western Europe. Towns and cities were turned into battlegrounds as the German troops marched through the most populated and urbanized country of all Europe. As early as 1914, Charles Le Gastelot, president of the Royal Commission of Monuments and Sites, and Paul Saint-Noir, a member of the same Royal Commission, published an article outlining a plan for rebuilding war-ravaged towns and villages. And I quote from that report: it is fitting that our fatherland should rise again, more beautiful and magnificent from its temporary ruins. We will apply, in particular cases, the general rules of the aesthetics of towns and villages. The beauty of the ensemble is what we must strive for. An annexed talk by Charles Bulls, I think most of you know who he is, on the aesthetics of towns from 1910 was added, emphasizing the importance of regionalist diversity in restoration and conservation. But of course, reconstruction was prematurely on the agenda of the Royal Commission of Monuments, and it would take another 4 years before the armistice was signed. In short, the German offensives were halted in West Flanders, where was a bloody trench war that lasted for 4 years on the Western Front, with some of the most destructive battles, such as those at Weitschaten, Passendale, and of Meissen, all taking place in what's been called the Ypres salients. Shortly after the November 1918 armistice, many refugees returned to the region, oblivious of to the extent of the devastation. Many people were taken aback by the sight of the wasteland. Those who could afford to start a new life elsewhere left the area permanently. The reconstruction after the war was not only material, it was also a rebuilding of society after the traumas of the war, and an opportunity for revitalization. Rebuilding simultaneously needed to be grounded in the present as well as meaningful for its dramatically disrupted contemporaries. The Belgian government quickly realized that the municipalities could not complete this challenging task on their own. In April 1919, the Belgian government passed legislation authorizing the adoption by the state of devastated towns and cities, which was followed by the establishment of the Devastated Regions Office. Raphael van Willigen, an early modernist architect in Belgium, had done the preliminary work during the war for the establishment of this office. The national government took into account the concerns of municipal councils, which did not have much revenue in the first few years after the war, aside from compensation for war damage. Terrains were drained in 1919, allowing the clearing of landmines and the removal of rubble, and some battlefield's remnants were preserved in the forms of craters. From the beginning, there has been a difference in views, one that was more progressive and wanted to rebuild using new town planning ideas, and that was the Union of Belgian Cities and Municipalities, and a traditionalist view, the already mentioned Royal Commission of Monuments and Sites, that wanted to rebuild devastated towns and villages using the historically developed pre-war layouts. Let's now look at some examples to see how this reconstruction actually went. Zonnebeke, a village, small village really, to the east of Ypres, on the front line, appeared to be a wasteland during the winter of 1918. There were no houses nor trees, only enormous holes and pools of mud, bits of iron and wood, used arms and ammunition, carcasses and human corpses. This painting by William Orpen in the Tate in London illustrates this well. This is what the refugee inhabitants found when they returned months after the armistice in early 1919. On a huge pile of rubble, there was a white wooden cross with the words Zonnebeke Church written on it. Zonnebeke was formally adopted by the Belgian government in August 1919 under the devastated regions law mentioned earlier. Hubert Huip Hoste was appointed as Zonnebeke municipality's architect and urban planner. Hoste would play an important role in the village's reconstruction. The council rejected his first plans because they were too expensive, but the 1921 plan for reconstruction was approved. And these plans for his church were approved in September of that year, and construction began already in October in 1921. And the building was finished, consecrated 2.5 years later. Not bad. No, this work. I come. Next slide, please. Yes, great. Hoste departed from a functionalist viewpoint, analyzing the various activities that had to take place within the church when designing the general layout, borrowing ideas from the liturgical movement. An active and unhindered participation of the parishioners during Mass was central in the ideas, resulting in a wide nave without columns to allow clear views of the altar. To accommodate the other sacraments, such as baptism and confession, Hoste provided separate spaces for these functions, confessionals in the side aisles and a baptismal chapel beneath the bell tower. The interior is typified by the visible concrete truss over the nave, cubist decoration down dark brown glazed bricks, angel figures, and abstract composition stained glass windows. Using brick masonry in general for both the interior and exterior, Hoste uses a local resource while adhering to its own rationalistic philosophy. Regarding the roof of the church, the visible concrete structure was truly novel and pioneering in terms of church construction. How this church with its functionalist design was received in the Zonnebeke area can be deduced from what the parish priest Del Rue of the small village of Geluveld formulated for the new construction of his parish church. And I should mention that Geluveld is a village within the Zonnebeke municipality. And Father Del Rue repeatedly criticizes Hoste's use of cubism. He even wrote Bolshevik cubism and explicitly calls to rebuild the church in a regional Gothic style. And back in Zonnebeke, Father Lammens of Zonnebeke had Hoste's church redecorated at his own expense and allegedly had a brick wall built around it to keep it hidden. While Hoste had made an effort to build an affordable structure for contemporary needs, the users preferred something else. The villagers required comfort and familiarity, especially after the traumas of war. Yes. The reconstruction of Ypres Cathedral took place in a very different way. The Church of St. Martin, which served as a bishop's seat from the late 16th century to the early 19th century, and is thus known as Ypres Cathedral, is a Gothic building dating primarily from the 13th century. Together with the cloth hall and its belfry, the cathedral form the defining elements of this historic medieval Flemish town. The cathedral's exterior was restored in the early 20th century by the architect Jules Comans, who brought back the southern portal to its believed 13th century Gothic stage, removed many later interventions, and came with the idea to provide the tower with a stone spire. The cathedral was hit the first time on November 22nd in 1914, and by November 1918, there was not much left of it, as you can see here. The measurement and restoration drawings by Comans were an ideal departure for the recovery of the cathedral. However, reconstruction was not obvious. After the armistice, it soon became apparent that the British also wanted to have their say in what would happen to Ypres. Tens of thousands of men serving the British Empire had died in the area, earning Ypres the moniker Holy Ground. The Imperial War Graves Commission, later the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, was already constructing and maintaining cemeteries and war memorials at the time. Winston Churchill expressed his desire to acquire the ruins of Ypres, either by a gift from the Belgians, or by an agreement or purchase or something as British territory to make it the core of the war cemeteries around it. Eventually, the decision was made and Ypres would be largely rebuilt with the exception of the colossal belfry and the cathedral, as this area would become a zone of silence. Coleman's, who had observed the discussions, was to provide the British with detailed plans for the demarcation of this area. Churchill's proposal was met with opposition from the local population, a population which accused the local mayor of not involving the municipal council in the decision-making process. Thus, Churchill's ideas never materialized. Instead, Coleman's was appointed as architect for the reconstruction of the cathedral based on his previous pre-war measurements and restoration plans. The foundation stone was laid in November 1922. In 1924, the materials to be used were indicated, including reinforced concrete, artificial stone, and some natural stone like petit granit and gobertange. 3 years after the beginning of the reconstruction, the proposal was made to have a roof construction of reinforced concrete. And in 1928, a revised plan of Coleman's stone spire project was agreed upon. During the reconstruction, the interior of the cathedral was not brought back to how it was before destruction. For example, many of the blind niches have been replaced with stylized versions, and the Baroque high altar was replaced by something new. This is something you see regularly, actually, and during the 20th century. People do not like Baroque in the 20th century. Contemporary architects like Oscar Sinia created new sculpture in a more or less contemporary style, and the involuntary reconstruction also meant that modernizations could be implemented, such as the full integration of an electricity grid. Mason. The Church of St. Nicholas in the village of Mason, Messine in French and English, was destroyed during the Battle of the Mines of 1917. The original building dates back to the early 11th century, when it was founded by Countess Adele of Flanders. In the 12th century, the church was rebuilt in a Romanesque style, and over time it was adapted, expanded, shortened, all according to the needs of time. At the end of the 19th century, the importance of the church was understood by the Gothic revival architect and restorer Jean-Baptiste de Béthune, who documented the building in descriptions and photographs. But the destruction of the war had created a new situation that had previously been overlooked, as just cellar for storage now appeared to have a core from the 11th century. Thus, while churches were rebuilt in the surrounding villages, research and studies were carried out in Mason. Canon Mare was the first to emphasize the significance of this discovery, unique in West Flanders, in a report to the Royal Commission of 1923. Ultimately, a design by Charles Patris was completed, a largely hypothetical. Oh, well, this is a very nice reconstruction design for the crypts. I should have shown them earlier. I think it's lovely. It also, in plan, looks quite a lot like what you showed, showing actually that in this period, all over Europe, is more or less the same plan was used, which is interesting, I think. Okay, this Romanesque plan was recovered. However, with a reduced nave and with modern additions such as the baptistry and sacristy. Traditional buildings material were used for construction, such as sandstones and blah, blah, blah. I'll skip a bit. The exterior is an attempt to be a hypothetical replica of the 12th century building. The interior, in contrast, is a contemporary design in a hybrid style between Neo-Romanesque and Art Deco. The new church was inaugurated in 1938. Michel English, a Bruges architect, described Mason Church in 1939 as, I quote, a caricature of archaeological recovery. Well, it's not unique there. Today, it is mainly a place where pilgrims commemorate the dead of the Great War. And every time you visit St. Nicholas, you'll find a poppy or two lying inside. My final example today is St. Vedastus in Vlamertinge, a typical West Flemish old church that was reconstructed between 1920 and 1923 by the architects Guillaume Verhaert and Ernest Rechier. As was the case in Ypres, all the drawings could be used to create the reconstruction design, except for some interesting changes. The tower was widened a bit, the central aisle was raised, and the number of columns in the nave was reduced, inspired by the ideas of the liturgical movement, to mention the most obvious design changes. Almost 2 decades earlier, the architect and restorer from Ghent, Louis Cloquet, had made the distinctions between what he called dead monuments and living buildings. According to him, it is acceptable to adapt and modernize a historic building as long as the integrity of the original is maintained, in order to prevent them from becoming obsolete monuments. This is a nice plan for use for the reconstruction. And you can see a bit, well, the red bits are new, while the gray bits are recovered from the original. The present building is itself a restoration of the interwar reconstruction, which was bombed several times during the Second World War. Vlamertinge is, because of that reason, mentioned at the end of this talk, because it is a very typical place of worship for this region. It is a brick Gothic old church, destroyed during the First World War, reconstructed, and then destroyed again and again, reconstructed, and now anticipating the Second Vatican Council reforms. Many religious buildings in the West Hook have similar stories to tell. These were not functionalist rebuildings, nor archaeologically correct ones, but they did follow the concept that the Royal Commission had formulated already at the end of 1914. The beauty of the ensemble is important, and that ensemble needs to express regional building tradition. And for this part of Flanders, the regional building tradition is brick Gothic. The prominence of brick is furthermore due to its low cost and local availability. So, how was that experienced? Let's say. The well-known Flemish author Stijn Streuvels described the rebuilding in his 1923 book, Land and Life in Flanders, as follows, and I quote, "Towns and villages with churches and houses arisen from the ashes like magic, rebuilt in stone, strong and solid. Architects have committed themselves, have even succeeded surprisingly well thank you, Stan, to reconstructing whole villages with churches, dwellings and farms in regional rural style to give the region its old Flemish character, but with respect for modern demands and techniques. The reconstruction had come with several challenges. Is it to be functional, or should it recall history? Should it preserve recent heritage, such as the war, or return to the medieval past? The first challenge concerned finding the balance between affordable building contemporary needs and recovery of the familiar. The functionalist approach, as proposed by Hoster in Zonnebeke, only partially answered this problem. Another challenge concerned the problem of the conservation of which past. The medieval past itself posed a challenge. How far can a scientifically based reconstruction go before it becomes too hypothetical and a caricature of itself? It has been argued that the reconstruction took a traditionalist approach. I argue that this is a misinterpretation. Architects created a functional outline for churches, influenced by the ideas of the liturgical movement, applied scientific archaeological reconstruction in some cases, used modern construction techniques, and didn't shy away to use reinforced concrete. In my opinion, it's better to speak of a hybrid, where historic building merged with modern practice requirements and modern construction techniques. The reconstruction of interwar Belgium was one of rebuilding society after the trauma of war. Something that overlaps modernity and tradition, recovering a familiar and contemporary image in a built environment that is both beautiful and useful, with buildings that are both cost-effective, useful, and express regionalism. It was part of a modernizing movement that remained respectful to traditional architecture and regional environment. The sight of familiar buildings, evoking comforting memories of the past, provided the war-shocked people of the much-needed consolation. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask if somebody has very quick, short questions, because we will have time for the discussion at the end of the day, yes? So, yeah, okay. So I have a pleasure to present our next speaker, Professor Anneli Randla from Estonian Art Academy. She is a senior research fellow and head of the Department of Conservation and Cultural Heritage at the Estonian Academy of Arts. She has studied history at Tartu University, gained her MA in medieval studies from the Central European University in Budapest, and did her PhD in art history at the University of Cambridge. Anneli has worked for the National Heritage Board of Estonia and been a member of their Council of the National Program for the Places of Worship, taking part in investigation and conservation works in many medieval churches in Estonia. Her research interests range from technical art history to conservation history and theory and beyond. The subject of her presentation of today is Museum of Atheism and Prisons Firewood Storage, Reconstructing Medieval Churches in Soviet Estonia. Please. So thank you for inviting me, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've learned so much from the first two presentations already, and the keynote speech especially, that I could make a completely new presentation, but I will stick to what I prepared for today. Does this work or doesn't it? No. Okay. Seems to work. So, okay. Was there any straightforward logic behind the treatment of historic churches after the Second World War damage in the Soviet Union? The short answer would be no. The fate of the buildings could vary enormously, from total demolition to full reconstruction. Their destiny often depended on chance rather than reason. I will illustrate this with 3 case studies from Estonia. I will discuss the fate of 3 medieval churches in Estonia, which were all damaged in the Second World War. You can see what they looked like before the war. St. Nicholas in Tallinn, St. John's in Tartu, and St. Nicholas in Pärnu were all wealthy city parish churches in the Middle Ages. They continued to serve as evangelical churches after the Reformation and were in active use until the Second World War. In the interwar Estonian Republic, they had been listed as historical monuments and protected by law. All of them had German-speaking congregations, which differentiated them from the majority of Estonian-speaking congregations. Most of the Germans left in 1939 with the so-called Umsiedlung to Germany, and the congregations ceased to exist. But this is not important for the Soviet Union, of course. All 3, and well, this is what they looked like by the end of the Soviet rule, so by early 1990s. And as you see, if the starting point was the same, or more or less the same, the outcome is quite different. Now, okay. And let's have the three as well. Now, all three suffered in the Second World War, and the amount of damage was comparable. All three burnt, lost their spires, the roofs, wooden furnishing, and so on. But the walls and vaults, in part at least, remained intact. Thus, substantial ruins were still standing after the warfare ceased. However, the fate of these churches after the war varied considerably. The occupation of Estonia by the Soviet Union meant radical changes in church policy. Religion was labeled opium of the people, as Karl Marx called it, and rebuilding ruined churches as places of worship was out of the question. On the other hand, built cultural heritage could be saved as a manifestation of the labor and creativity of the working class. So something used in Soviet ideology. In such an ideologically heated environment, heritage officials used every conceivable argument to save the historic churches, but their efforts had varied results. In 1947, the first list of historical buildings was prepared in accordance with the new Soviet Union legislation, and all three churches were included, thus providing them legal protection as historical monuments. In reality, this had little impact. No conservation works were undertaken and the ruins deteriorated gradually. The neglect was further aided by the lack of the congregations, but this again was not the main thing about it. 6 years later, in 1953, the fate of two of these churches was discussed. A commission consisting of the same officials decided to demolish St. Nicholas in Pärnu, but to spare St. John's in Tartu. A restoration workshop had been founded in the ruins of St. Nicholas in Tallinn in 1950 already, and therefore the destiny of this church was not discussed. But let's look at them more closely, one by one. Now, St. Nicholas in Pärnu, this is what it looked like before the war. Yes, the interior and also the exterior. And as you see, it's in the middle of a really dense medieval city, so surrounded by buildings, and mainly the tower is visible, so it was really compact in the city. Now, okay, that's 1944. The church ruins were left standing in the 1940s. As you see, quite a lot was still standing up there. And if you look at the interior, you can see that the walls are still there. There is even some plaster on the walls. Well, but it was left without a roof. Now, in 1950, the surrounding area was cleared of other damaged buildings, but the ruins of the church were still standing. However, nothing was done to prevent deterioration by weather and by people using the ruins as a quarry for bricks. Something that quite often happened in devastated cities anyway. The city architect and the monuments preservation officer tried hard to prevent the demolition of the protected monument. It was officially protected already in 1947, but were outnumbered by the city political power and the grand development plans by the head of the Central Construction Office. Following the decision taken by the Commission of the Academy of Sciences in 1953, claiming that the ruins of St. Nicholas in Pärnu had lost all architectural value, the church was razed to ground in 1954. The ruins were blown up to make space for wide new streets and modern housing blocks. So this is how it was blown up, and what was left after it had been blown up, just a pile of bricks, more or less. But still, even after having been blown up, there was still something left. Now, anyway, every trace reminding the existence of the church was eradicated. In the late 1980s, idealistic plans were made to rebuild the church from scratch. But for practical reasons, these plans didn't materialize. As you can see, there are houses behind the place where the church, or actually on the spot where the church stood. The only tangible reminder of the former church is a simple memorial erected in 1989 on the site of the former church, which the inauguration you can see here, and this is how it looks now in the backyard of a prefabricated block of flats. So this is the story of the first case. Now, St. Nicholas in Tallinn had a different fate. In spite of similar starting point, and here you can see what it looked like before the war, with the exterior and interior, with a lot of furnishings inside, of which most unfortunately burned. So, but again, this is 1944, where you can see that the walls were still there, plaster was on the walls, and even on the most right-hand side photo, you can see that actually even the wooden altar with its altarpiece survived the fire. Most of the damage was to the western part of the church, but this was not how it remained. So, in spite of similar starting point as St. Nicholas in Pärnu, in Tallinn, the church was spared from demolition. But the ruins stood unattended, and although they should have been protected, the building deteriorated, and several written complaints have been filed about building material being stolen from the site. Now, elsewhere in the Soviet Union, a scientific restoration workshop was established in 1950, and the ruins of St. Nicholas were turned into their material storage facility. This enabled to put at least a fence around the site and have a guard. However, the earliest projects for saving and reconstructing the building date from 1949, and they were made by an architect and conservation officer, Edberg. This did not, okay, this is the 1948, where you can still see the surrounding area has been cleared and made into a landscape already. And on the left-hand side, you can more or less see that the walls are still standing. There is no roof on the church, there is no spire, but you can see, if you can see, okay, just the walls of the central nave still being in place. Now, but because nothing was done, what happened next was that that most of the walls and pillars collapsed in 1952. So just if you don't do anything, even if you put a fence around the ruins, then they would collapse after all. Now, however, the reconstruction started in earnest only a few years later in 1956, but it did. And again, after the most urgent works were completed, the process stopped again. But okay, that's 1952 still. And well, in 1950, as I said, they made already it into a scientific restoration workshop. And that's after they had cleared the 1952 rubbish or the stones that fell down, then it was used as a storage. So this is why the car is there as well. Now, as I said, things did improve, and by 1960, the interior was complete again, and it did get a roof. But another problem arrived. Meanwhile, the function of the edifice was debated. It was impossible to reconstruct it as a church in an officially atheist state like Soviet Union. The next best option was to convert it into a museum and or a concert hall. But it had to be an ideologically correct museum. It couldn't be any museum. And ironically, this meant that the church was to become the Museum of Atheism. In 1964, a part of the art museum was added to the plan, and thus the new name was to be the Museum of Atheism and Ancient Art. The design proposal of 1965 by the architect Lours turned the church entirely into an exhibition hall and added a modernist 5-story office block. Another proposal was made by the architect Peter Tarvats, which foresaw a 3-story cafe on top of the missing spire of the tower, but none of these plans were realized. And since 1960, the interior stayed like this for nearly 20 years and nothing happened. Now, but concerning the tower, okay, so this is 1969. You see, this is since 1960, it had been looking like this, so more or less the building complete without the spire. Now, gentlemen, deciding what to do about the spire of the church. And here are some plans, what to do with it and how to reconstruct it. And in 1973, at last, the spire was reconstructed to look like it had been before the Second World War. No modern cafe or anything else like this. And the interior of the church was rebuilt to exhibit the medieval core of the building, adding a totally modernist organ loft and underground entrance area. In retrospect, even the authentically reconstructed part of the church has a modernist hint to its design. The museum was to open for the Moscow Olympics in 1980, but the works were delayed. And to make things worse, then in 1982, for still unknown reason, the spire caught fire and burned down. It was not an accident, but the arsonists were never caught. And this, of course, provided a lot of conspiracy theories, which are going on still today. Luckily, this was not the end of the story. So the spire was once again rebuilt, and the museum finally opened in 1984. So quite a lot of time later. So thus, the post-war reconstruction of the church took more than 30 years to complete, and its function transformed from the Museum of Atheism to the Museum of Medieval Church Art. So we may say that there was something good about it, that it took so long. The discussions and decisions defining the architectural design of the project reflect the preferences of the art historians and conservation architects in the 50s and 60s. And to complete it all, then this is just this year, an elevator which was planned already in the 1970s, but never built in the Soviet time, has only recently been installed. So we get the latest modernist installation to this church now. Now, so this is the second case. So either you lose it completely or you rebuild it completely and you see what comes out. Now, the third option is demonstrated by St. John's in Tartu, which you can see here before the Second World War again. The interior does not look too medieval, I would say, but it had to do with its intermediate history. In the 18th century, it lost its vaults in the nave, and its sculptures were plastered over. St. John's in Tartu, again, 1944, this is how it looked. Most of the walls being still intact, a lot of plaster on it and decoration and so on. But the church in Tartu was left in limbo for half a century after the war. Although there were plans to demolish the unsightly ruins in the 1950s. Paradoxically, the remains were saved thanks to their post-war use, the firewood storage of a nearby prison and just across the street. So if they had not used it as a firewood storage in late 1940s and early 50s, then maybe the fate of this church would have been different. Anyway, in 1953, at the same time as the demolition of St. Nicholas in Pärnu was decided, St. John's in Tartu, which was also discussed, was saved. And apparently by the intervention of high-ranking art historians from Moscow, not from Estonia. Now, after in 1953, it was decided not to demolish it. But in spite of that, further damage followed in 1954 when the northern pillars collapsed and a lot of material actually was lost. Nothing really happened. So you can see here 1944, the northern side still standing, and after 54, when there is nothing left of it. There was, if there was something good about it, so being left without a roof as a ruin, was that the medieval sculptures, which had been plastered over previously, started to appear and were also uncovered to a certain extent. So what you see here are the really lovely terracotta sculptures. Here you can see the three already uncovered, and a row of heads here, and here still uncovered, still plastered over. And this is the largest group of the terracotta sculptures, which was not visible before the war either. Now, although some research and investigations went on and some uncovering of the sculptures, only pathetic attempts were made to consolidate the ruins in the 1960s. So you can see, well, now in 1962, at least something was done to prevent the walls from collapsing completely. The actual situation barely changed by the end of until the 1990s. So it was still without a roof, still without any proper protection, and even the scaffoldings which had been built were more or less collapsing in 1992, as you see. Now, only after Estonia regained its independence in 1991 did the reconstruction of the church begin. And well, by 1994, it was still a ruin, but you can see that something is happening already. There is some roof on the chancel part, or being built on the chancel part. Now, not to end with so sad a picture. So this is how it looked in 2005 when the works were finished and the church was again consecrated as a church. Now, the principle followed here were similar to those in St. Nicholas in Tallinn, but the outcome differed considerably. But this is another story because that's already after 1991. Now, to conclude, these are three different stories of three churches which started from the same point, one might say, and as I described them, the work that was done or undone was by either heritage officials, politicians, or architects, and who was missing from the picture were the people. So no one asked the public what they thought about it, whether there was well, the congregations had ceased to exist, but whether there was any users or anything like this. So this is only the 1990s and later on that these questions arose. In the Soviet time, in the people's time, so to say, no one asked the people what they thought about it. So, and that's the end of it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for very interesting presentation. Any questions? Not yet. So I would like to present our third speaker, Mathieu Lours. Yes. He was very modest and gave just a little bit of information on his activities. So he is a historian of architecture, specializing in religious architecture in France, especially French cathedrals, their change, adaptation, and mutilation during the ages. So the title of his presentation is The Post-War Reconstruction of Churches in Normandy, France. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your invitation. My first idea was to speak about Normandy, but it was a very huge region. So I decided to concentrate in a city context. Possibilities were three: Lisieux, Caen, or Rouen. The most typologic was Caen, because a new city was built on the ruins of the old one. But I think Rouen is very more interesting for our purpose, because a lot of different solutions, very not typical, were put into action in Rouen after the Second World War. So the question of rebuilding churches after the Second World War in France constitutes a crucial issue regarding the role of heritage in the life of the nation. Indeed, the churches destroyed during the conflict were, on one hand, religious buildings, but according to the property regime established in the French Revolution and confirmed in 1905, there were also civic structures. The Cathedral of Rouen is the property of the French state, while parish churches belong to the municipality. Rouen possessed one of the richest heritage in this regard. It preserved 15 parish churches from the old regime, despite revolution. Some of them were repurposed into museums like Saint-Laurent, or passed into private hands like Saint-Pierre-du-Châtel, or became Protestant temples like Saint-Éloi, or even synagogues like Sainte-Marie-la-Petite. The incomparable heritage in Normandy and even in France was affected by two series of bombings. The first bombings in Rouen were German bombings in June 1940, followed by a fire during the Franco-German tank battles in the north bank of the Seine. The second series occurred during the Allied bombings in April and from May 30 to June 5 in 1944, during that the Rouen inhabitants calls Red Week. All of these bombings deeply impacted Rouen's sacred heritage. A first reconstruction effort was launched at the end of 1940, but was interrupted by the course of the war. In 1944, new plans were made, raising the question of what to do with damaged churches. The criteria was multiple. The first was legal. The municipality had to restore the places of worship it owned, mobilizing war damage funds provided by the government. The second was political. The Vichy government, which collaborated with the Nazi occupiers, had to rebuild without explicitly reminding who had bombed the city in 1940. However, it used the bombing of 1944 to demonize the Anglo-Saxon that was bombing the city to liberate Normandy. Conversely, in 1944, it was necessary to rebuild structure destroyed by the liberators without accusing them. Then the neutrality of the building was necessary. The Church of Rouen could not become accusatory memorials, as they would delegitimize the liberators. Finally, in terms of restoration doctrine, what choices were available? Several options were possible. Rebuilding identically, constructing contemporary architecture to replace part of all of the destroyed buildings, preserving a state of ruin, or simply erasing it. In Rouen, each of these paths was explored in several buildings, but with a major difference compared to other Norman cities. There are no in-situ reconstruction in contemporary style in Rouen, except for Sainte-Marie-la-Petite, which became a synagogue. However, there are cases of reconstruction creations in different locations, as with Sainte-Jeanne d'Arc, and cases of preserved ruins, like the disused church of Saint-Pierre-du-Châtel. How can this Rouen-specific characteristic be explained? In what ways are they both typological and exceptional within the post-World War II reconstruction carried out in France? We will attempt to provide insight by following three axes. First, how do these reconstructions fit into inherited heritages, practices already implemented in Rouen? What are the political issues related to the reconstruction of buildings? What choices for reconstructions, and what new role for sacred building in the rebuilt city? Excuse me. Yes, I will do that. This, by the way, this is the good one. Even before the World War II, the city of Rouen had experienced heritage traumas concerning its place of worship. Solutions were adopted that implemented the notion of continuity and rupture with the use of contemporary materials for structures in continuity with the destroyed forms. However, this was generally done to magnify the enhance, the coherence, and the visibility of the monument. In 1822, the spire of Rouen Cathedral caught fire. This is like a view that reminds us world wars, but it was only an accidental fire in the 19th century. The Renaissance wooden structure that crowns the transept tower vanished in the flames. For the first time, as in 1940 and 1944, the image of the cathedral in flames fills the media through engravings. The decision was made to construct a new cast iron spire designed by the architect Alavoine. This technological marvel was conceived in 1825 to become the tallest religious structure in the world at 153 meters. However, its aesthetic were neo-Gothic, erasing the Renaissance contribution. From the ruins emerged a coherence that resonated with both the 19th century and Gothic architecture. Additionally, in Rouen, as early as 1855, the incorporation of a church remnant into renewed urban environment was realized. The Tower of Saint-André Church, you see on the right, disused since the Revolution and later demolished, was integrated to the Haussmannian-style avenue and the city planning of the 19th century, somewhat following the model of the Saint-Jacques Tower in Paris, with the remaining church fragment escaping the status of ruin, becoming an authentic piece of flamboyant Gothic urban ornament. Another tragedy unfolded in 1944. Where is it? I think there is an error. It stay here, but it's okay. In 1934, yes, where with the fire of the Saint Nicaise Church, the nave and the wooden bell tower was destroyed. For the reconstruction, the choice of a concrete structure prevailed. A new nave was built, constructed in concrete, supported by 4 large pointed arches carrying a lantern tower. On the facade, a network of decorative elements evoked flamboyant Gothic, and on the side, there was a tower topped with a spire, In the city skyline, it became a familiar form, even more in line with the idea of a medieval church than the unfinished former Saint-Nicaise nave. Architects Pierre Chirol and Émile Gaillard were responsible for this. The solution chosen for Saint-Nicaise of Rouen was quite similar to many reconstructions carried out after the Second World War, such as in Valognes, but with removal of decorative elements to emphasize the eloquence of pure concrete volumes. Now, how respond to ruins? This is the challenge of war destructions in Rouen. On June 1st, 1940, the German incendiary bombs struck Rouen in the midst of tank battles taking place on the right bank of the Seine. The quarter stretching from the cathedral to the Seine, where it is, okay, here was this part of Rouen, was destructed. The cathedral itself suffered significant damage. The chapels of the southern nave collapsed, except for St. Catherine Chapel, whose flying buttresses supported the nave and preserved it to collapse. This chapel saves the whole nave of the cathedral. As early as in June 1940, a reconstruction project for Rouen was devised by the architect Grébert. It envisioned an identical reconstruction of the cathedral, with a clear clearance of a vast space between it and the Seine. This necessitated the demolition of the old 14th century chapel of the Hôtel Dieu, since it had been used as a residence since the Revolution. The decision was made not to rebuild, to clear space around the cathedral and facilitate circulation. In 2015, it allowed to discover the foundation and the transformation of this part of the cathedral surroundings into an archaeological space. This clearance ultimately revealed the medieval structure of the cathedral district. The bombing of 1944 had a deeper impact on Rouen religious heritage, especially the cathedral. On April 18, 7 torpedoes hit the cathedral, weakening the transept tower. On June 1st, the Saint-Romain Tower was set ablaze, losing its belfry and roof. In June, St. Vincent Church was practically annihilated, along with the Saint-Éloi Temple and Sainte Marie la Petite, the synagogue. The Vichy regime capitalized on the opportunity. First, by emphasizing in the press that German occupation soldiers had actively helped extinguish fire and save artworks in the churches. Second, through a communication campaign using posters like the one showing Rouen in flame, transformed in Joan of Arc's pyre, with a slogan reviving the anti-English sentiment. Ruined churches became tools for delegitimizing the enemy. Once liberation was achieved, the task was to rebuild, but to make the reconstruction politically neutral, in order to work toward national reconciliation, both internally and with the Allies. Little change. There were new reconstruction plans promoted by Jean Autreux, Henri Barman, and Jean Fontaine, accompanied by the chief architects of historic monuments, François Eyre and Jean Desmarais, with both more ambitious and more specific than the one of 1940.
It now aimed to better respect the city center road layout with less clearance around cathedral. However, the work by blocks and the desire to address city center circulation characterize many neighborhoods in the city. As for the churches, what approach should be taken? Rouen distinguishes itself from two other Norman cities, with solutions adopted are highly typological. Let's briefly look at Caen and Saint-Lô. Caen presents the solution of identical reconstructions as seen with the Church of Saint-Pierre, with a philological restoration following the major heritage guidelines of the 20th century guidelines like Chart of Athens. However, in Saint-Lô, architect Paul Froidevaux proposed persevering the damaged facade of Notre Dame Church, considered a little archaeological interest as it dated back to the 14th century. It became a war memorial, serving as an ode to peace through this juxtaposition of war remnants. This universal message of peace and war allowed avoiding implicit accusations against allies that destroyed the building. In Caen, on the other hand, there is also the case of an in situ reconstruction of contemporary church with Saint-Jean, which preserved no trace of the medieval building while remaining the center of the rebuilt neighborhood. Only the first of these typological examples are found in Rouen, where original solution was found to adapt the relationship between urban functions, sacredness, and heritage. For the cathedral, a typological reconstruction was chosen. Architect Albert Chauvel painstakingly reconstructs the damaged part of the building. However, it preserves the opportunity of renew liturgical furnishment to align with the refined expectation of the clergy in the 1950s. The restored cathedral, owned by the state, was inaugurated by the presence of President of Republic René Coty on June 17 in 1956. However, the roof of the St. Roman Tower was only restored in 1987. Thus, wounded by both Germans and Anglo-Saxons, the cathedral emerged as a witness of the regained national sovereignty. If the restoration of the cathedral was a state matter, the restoration of Paris churches was a municipal affair. The main heritage loss in Rouen during the war was the near total destruction of the city's fourth largest church, Saint-Vincent. This grand flamboyant Gothic church had a collection of 13 16th century stained glass windows, fortunately removed to safety during the war. The decision was made not to rebuild the church. Instead, a memorial rune was retained at the site in the form of the church portal, the only element that remained standing and could be stabilized. This also allowed for widening streets in this crucial downtown area and the construction of an administrative building on the church footprint. This functional shift led to a form of memorial erasure. However, the loss of Saint-Vincent led to construction of a memorial church at another location in the city, tied to a different legacy. Since 1920, there have been discussions about erecting a memorial on the site of Joan of Arc's execution. In 1969, Mayor Jean Le Canuet decided to allocate the sum received by the city from the war damage administration for Saint-Vincent Church to the construction to a new church. This church will serve as a memorial of Joan of Arc's execution and blend into the design of a new covered market. Architect Louis Arech designed a monumental complex combining a church and market as a memorial of Joan of Arc's execution. The new church of Joan of Arc integrates stained windows from Saint-Vincent. Thus, financed by the Fund Mint for Saint-Vincent and reusing its stained glasses, Saint-Jean d'Arc is a new church, simultaneously a memorial to a major historical event that occurred there, the death of the national heroine, and the lost structures, but in a different site. Once again, a president of Republic was present at inauguration, this time Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. The only case of in situ reconstruction of a destroyed building in Rouen is a synagogue. In 1869, the Jewish community of Rouen was allocated the former church Sainte-Marie-la-Petite, which had been closed for Catholic worship in the French Revolution. This 15th century building was nearly destroyed during the English bombing on May 31, 1944. In 1950, the decision was made to construct a contemporary building with volumes similar to the old churches. The architect was François Eyre. For the Jewish community, it was also an opportunity to assert their identity with the presence of a large stained glass window depicting the Star of David, and to break away from a building whose appearance evoked the worship that have taken place until the Revolution. Thus, the only contemporary in situ reconstruction carried a particular significance related to the tragedy experienced by the Jewish community, which was regaining its rightful place in Republican France. Apart from the few remnants left in place of Saint-Vincent, the only church in Rouen that remained in ruins after the war was Saint-Pierre-du-Châtel. This was largely due to its status. The building had not been used for worship since Revolution and had been used for industrial purpose since then in private hands. Nevertheless, in 1944, the church lost its wood paneling and its vault, and only its tower and large arches remained. Uncertainly surrounded what to do with it during reconstruction. In fact, during the widening of Saint-Saëns Street in 1951, the apse accidentally collapsed. The original material was stored, and the building became a picturesque and abandoned ruin. Its heritage value led to its protection as an historic monument, and the city purchased it in 1958, also without a specific project in mind. The Le Sec Museum was already established in a former church, and perhaps this logic should have been followed. Ultimately, it was within the context of the contemporary city that Saint-Pierre-du-Châtel could emerge from its ruined state. In 2019, the city decided to sell 4 churches. The first was Saint-Nicaise, which was already disused, and it became an association-run brewery. The second was Saint-Jean, a large neo-Romanesque church that found no takers. And for Saint-Pierre-du-Châtel, it became a restaurant. It was rebuilt from ruins, which were entirely restored. Thus, the building transitions from being a war victim to a repurposed religious structure, embodying the fate of religious heritage in urban center, even so it had not been used for worship for more than 2 centuries. Such an example underscores the persistence of the sacred within the building itself, beyond its current designation. In this way, the religious heritage of Rouen appears both typical and atypical in the corpus of Norman religious buildings. Here, integration into a city undergoing transformation makes it both an example of identical reconstruction and of aesthetic and memorial shifts. In this sense, Rouen exemplifies remarkable heritage adaptability, with reconstruction stakeholders successfully combining memorial consideration and return to religious functions and architectural coherence. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And now I announce the coffee break, yes? And how long it can be, because yes, because we yeah, we started later a little bit, but anyway, yeah. So 10 minutes.
So again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second and final session for today. I'm Mara Popescu, architect from Romania, and I have the pleasure to introduce our next speakers. We will have our first online presentation by Dr. Anja Rasche and Dr. Nils Jörn. They're both from the Network Art and Culture of the Hansestädte in Wismar. And they will be presenting the Wismar miracle reconstruction of St. George's Church that went from 1990s until 2010. Thank you. You have the floor.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for having us here. Welcome to Wismar, which will celebrate its 800th birthday in 2029. Of course, the city is much older. The 800 years refer to a document in which Wismar has confirmed the use of the Lübisches Recht. We know of an imperial document that allows the people of Schwerin to have 2 cocks in Wismar's harbor for 1209, and thus know for certain that there must have been a city capable of maintaining a harbor where cocks could anchor as early as the turn of the 13th century. Watching the city grow at a breathtaking pace is always exciting for historians and archaeologists, especially since so much structural evidence has been preserved. As early as 1250, the town built around the market and St. Mary's Church and St. Nicholas Church became too small, and a new town was built in the immediate vicinity of the old one. You can see this in the proximity in which St. Mary's and St. George, the church we are to deal with today, stand to each other. I have greeted you with the oldest realistic representation of the city from the middle of the 16th century. St. George can be seen very nicely on it. Besides St. George, the church had other patrons: Stephen, Simon, Jude, Martin, Agnes, and Elizabeth. Already in the 1260s, the first construction was started. A new building can be proved for the second half of the 13th century. The core of this building has been preserved until today. It dates back to 1378. The rest of the church is several decades younger, because in the second half of the 15th century, an imposing, much larger new building was created, which integrated the older core, which was actually too small for this new building. This can be seen, among other things, in the fact that the high altare table, created around 1430, was built for a planned larger core. Since the money was missing, it remained with a smaller core until today. What you can see very nicely on the city map is the proximity of St. George Church to the Prince's Court. When the Mecklenburg dukes were in town, they used St. George as their church. This was one of the two places where Lutheran preaching was first done in 1524 by the court preacher, the other being the Franciscan monastery. Between the prince's court, where large ducal weddings were celebrated since the beginning of the 16th century, and the church of St. George, there was a connecting corridor that led directly into the core. The church, which is empty today, had several pieces of furnishings of European rank. The first and most important is a high altar, which is considered the largest and one of the most beautiful in the Baltic region. But also the Gothic wall and ceiling paintings, Renaissance and finally Baroque furnishings corresponded to the importance of the city as one of the important members of the Hanseatic League and as a central place of the Swedish conglomerate state since 1632. Not only were several church services celebrated here daily, then weekly, important meetings of the city and church congregations were held here, and of course, important personalities were buried here, which is manifested in tombstones, burial chapels, and epitaphs. All this came to an abrupt end in the last days of the Second World War. On the night of April 14, 1945, between 11:05 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., in less than half an hour, though, 5 British air mines destroyed what had been built in centuries of excellence. We do not have to discuss who started this war, that's clear to everyone. It is just as clear, however, that this air raid was militarily pointless. It was intended solely to wear down the population. The 2 great churches of St. George and St. Mary were severely damaged, and the Gothic quarter with its magnificent buildings went down in a couple of minutes. This was a place to which architects and architectural students from all over Europe made a pilgrimage, celebrating it as an ideal place with its numerous beautiful visual access, with a successful connection between the many remarkable individual buildings. This finding alone, that 25 minutes are enough to erase 500 years of architectural history, makes one become a pacifist. Nowadays, no one would have hesitated to rebuild this neighborhood. But back then, Wismar had completely different problems. Before the war, 29,000 people lived here. There was large-scale industry with Dornier, the rail car and wagon factory, and other companies, which, however, had been converted to the construction of war weapons after the start of the war and soon were destroyed. At the end of the war, 85% of the industry, but only 15% of the residential buildings in Wismar had been destroyed. An almost ideal place to take in refugees, displaced persons, and resettlers, and to distribute them from here. Today, one can no longer imagine what was pushing its way through the city on endless tracks. Armed soldiers of the British, Canadians, and since August the Russians. Disarmed, demobilized, and above all, demoralized German soldiers of all arms. Liberated and escaped concentration camp prisoners, endlessly long refugee tracks. All of them had one thing in common. They needed something to eat, and they had to find shelter somewhere. On some days, 1,000 new people arrived in the city, and 200 to 500 left again. A coming and going, epidemics, hunger, misery in a once proud city, which had to accommodate now up to 45,000 people in the greatest need. At the latest now, one is against wars worldwide, because one can finally understand them by a concrete example. And then there are 2 important huge churches crying out for repair. You can see from the picture how they deteriorate more and more every year. How the missing roofs and windows increasingly become a problem. St. Mary's was finally blown up in 1960, a wound that gapes in the cityscape to this day. In return, the Church Council promises to take care of St. George and restore it. But until the end of this existence in 1990, the GDR had completely different problems that seemed more important. The housing problem could not be solved even with the numerous new buildings, and there was a lack of material and craftsmen for the reconstruction of the Gothic church. Anja, Rasche, and I are in the process of writing a book about the years between 1945 and today concerning St. George. Part of this book consists of a chronicle of the planning, repairs, and construction work on the church. Until 1990, it is a chronicle of failure. Again and again, attempts were made to secure the ruin, to prevent collapses of parts of the church, to blow up individual chapels, to prevent worse. Mountaineers from the Elbe sandstone mountains removed the birch trees on the tops of the walls. A roof truss had already been erected, but then fell into disrepair again because no roof tiles or copper were available to close the church roof. In January 1990, with the GDR heading towards its demise, disaster and a turning point in this effort occurred. The gable of the church crashed into two houses opposite during a storm, completely destroying them and injuring 5 people, 2 of them seriously. This was a point where something had to happen. From here on, it was all uphill. And since in our team, I'm responsible for the bad news, Anja for the good ones, she takes over at this point and accompanies you through the successful reconstruction. Thanks.
So hello, I will continue now. In this second part of our speech, I deal with the rebuilding of the St. George Church in Wismar from 1990 and the questions that serve as a framework for the conference. How can the rebuilding of St. George Church be explained? Why, what, and how was it rebuilt? The rebuilding developed out of the necessity of saving the church, which had become obvious after the collapse of the northern gable in January 1990. The only alternative would have been to clear the site, but that was no longer an option in 1990. In fact, the pending final loss of historic buildings played a role in the growing opposition in the GDR at the end of the 1980s. There has been a research project called Stadtwende, which dealt with it. The Deutsche Stiftung Denkmalschutz, German Foundation for the Protection of Monuments, which decided as early as February 1990 to extend its commitment to Eastern Germany, played a major role in the decision to rebuild. Die Georgenkirche in Wismar became its flagship project. Professor Dr. Gottfried Kiso is particularly got involved and found an effective counterpart in Wismar in the mayor, Dr. Rosemarie Wilken, who was elected in May 1990. With the foundation's commitment to the Georgenkirche grew the foundation itself. St. George Church was indispensable for the identity of the city because Wismar had suffered significant losses in the Second World War, especially in the sacred area. This is how Kiso justified the foundation's commitment. St. George Church is praised as an important link at the Baltic Sea region chain of brick churches. But in addition to its art historical significance, it was also seen as, I quote in German, but you can read it, the translation on the slide, Zeugnis eines ungehemmten, aus dem Machtbewusstsein des reichen Bürgertums der Hansestädte, aber auch aus einem tiefen religiösen Bedürfnis entsprungenen Bauwillens, der die Kirchen der reichen Bistümer und Abteien an Größe und Ausstattung übertrumpfen wollte. So Adolf Friedrich Lorenz 1952. The importance of the church for the wealthy citizens of the Hanseatic city is stressed. The fact that the Georgenkirche was also a court church, namely a church of the Duke of Mecklenburg, plays no role in the justification for the rebuilding. The extent of the preserved substance, especially the rising stonework, is repeatedly cited as a further justification for rebuilding. Initially, it was discussed to secure and rebuild only the eastern parts of the church. The choir was in acute danger of collapse, so securing measures in this area were unavoidable and urgent. Vaulting and parts of the roof were still preserved in the choir, but badly damaged. In July 1990, a church use was mentioned as a condition for the rebuilding. This should take place in several phases. But in 1993, the Scientific Advisory Board was established and decided to protect the entire church and bring it under roof before starting the extension work. Why, what, and how was reconstruction carried out? The aim of the rebuilding was to restore the building to its pre-war state. This means that not only the damage caused by the destruction by air mines and fire in April 1945 had to be repaired, but also the decay caused by the lack of action between 1945 and 1990, which went far beyond the losses in 1945. Until 1945, St. George Church served as a parish church of the Neustadt parish, the third and youngest parish of the city of Wismar. It had everything a parish church needs: altarpieces, baptismal font, organ, pulpit, gravestones and epitaphs, choir screens, a triumphal cross, and numerous pews from the 16th to the 19th centuries. The extensive and high-ranking furnishings came from the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and the Swedish period. After the collapse of the Dominican Church in the 19th century, numerous pieces of furnishings, especially several altar pieces, were additionally brought to the Georgenkirche and were kept here. In addition, numerous Gothic wall paintings were discovered in the second half of the 19th century and restored in a manner typical of the period. The monument conservation objectives were presented to the city of Wismar as a building owner at the beginning of 1993 and discussed and approved by the Scientific Advisory Board. During the rebuilding, the pre-war state was changed in several places. This applies above all to two northern extensions to the choir, the sacristy and the so-called library. Both were blown up in 1961, so there was nothing left of the original substance. After extensive debates, the additions were largely rebuilt in historical forms, but this was made visible for the outside by reducing the forms, using different building materials, mesh and bricks, dispensing with scaffolding holes as they occur in the original stonework, and a slightly different color scheme. Initially, modern forms had been considered. In the interior, they did not follow the historical model, but added a basement built in a spiral staircase made of steel, toilet rooms and the ground floor and upper floor, and a meeting room at the very top. In addition, the rooms serve as storage facilities, e.g. for seating. Here, the necessities for using the Georgenkirche as a multifunctional venue have already been taken into account. A second deviation concerns the tower, which was erected at the end of the 16th century as an interim closure in half timbering. It was decided not to rebuild it in its original form, particularly for reasons of statics and fire protection. By converting it into a viewing platform that could be reached by a lift, it was hoped that it would also generate touristic traffic, which would help to ensure the long-term preservation of the church. This decision is its implementation in 2014 greatly changed Wismar's city skyline. How? The aim of the reconstruction was to preserve as much of the original substance as possible. Materials were actually used that correspond to the historical original, such as hand-struck bricks and roof tiles. For cost reasons, however, alternatives were also used, such as roofing with copper and machine-made roof tiles. The extensive use of concrete for static stabilization, both through wing anchors and for strengthening the foundations, was controversial. Functional rooms and a heating system were necessary for future use. In addition to securing the original substance, extensive additions were made in the course of the rebuilding. The entire church was vaulted again, and the windows and portals were closed. For the windows, it was decided to use the glazing remains found as a model. The portals, on the other hand, were designed in modern forms. Conservation, rebuilding, or transformation. In addition to the conservation of the preserved remains, extensive additions were also made to St. George Church in the sense of rebuilding. However, it is in the function and significance of the church that the most extensive transformation process can be found. Whereas before the destruction, the church was a parish church for the parish of St. George, and thus is in sacred ecclesiastical use, it has now been transformed into a cultural church. Although it is still possible to use the church for ecclesiastical purposes, and a room of silence is permanently present in a side chapel. Its function is mainly different, a secular one. On the one hand, the architecture itself is the focus of interest. The height and expanse of the space, the impressive illuminations through colossal window openings with changing impressions in the course of the day and year. On the other hand, St. George Church serves as an event location for a variety of cultural uses, for congresses, art exhibitions, arts and crafts markets, receptions, theater performances, and concerts. This use makes it impossible to put the numerous pieces of equipment back in the church that are still preserved and were in the church until 1945. They are now kept in various places. Considerable financial resources were invested in the conservation of the furnishings during the rebuilding of the architecture, even though not all of the work has been completed to this day. This has resulted in conflicts. For example, there were attempts to install a large organ at the original site and political initiatives to have the elaborately restored high altarpiece reinstalled in St. George Church. With the change of use, the meaning of the Georgenkirche has also changed. Today, it is considered the most important event and meeting place for all citizens and visitors of Wismar. The viewing platform has proven to be a crowd puller that also, as planned, generates income. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Do we have any questions? No? Then I will move on with our second online presentation done by Professor Dr. Miroslav Malinovic and Professor Dr. Jasna Guzijan from University of Banja Luka, Bosnia-Herzegovina. You have the floor.
Hello to everyone. I hope you can see my screen. Can someone just confirm me that you can hear me and that my screen is shared to you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's a great pleasure and honor to meet you all, to meet you all. I'm really sorry that I'm not able to participate in person, but I'll also show you that the reason why I'm not in Aachen also is linked to the conference paper. So I'll be presenting the paper named "The Second Life of Major Sacred Buildings in Banja Luka, Bosnia and Herzegovina." My colleague Jasna Guzijan is on the next slide. Yes, I wanted to show you two of us before presenting. So yesterday I attended a wedding ceremony. I was the best man. maybe you can see here me in the middle, and the wedding ceremony took place exactly in the church that I will be presenting today. So it's really a small case of coincidence. I'll be talking about 3 buildings built for 3 confessions, destroyed by 3 causes in 3 different eras, and yet located in one street, in one same city, creating one same history or historical image of Banja Luka. I suppose most of the participants are not very well or are not best aware of, I'll just take the laser pointer, are not best aware where Banja Luka is located. So I will quickly give a short introduction to that point, meaning in historical and geographical reference for all 3 stages from which the observed buildings were constructed. First, in the Ottoman Turkish era, Banja Luka was on the western border towards Austria and Hungary. It never had strategical importance to the Ottoman Empire, and from time to time was the seat of the administration of the Bosnian Pashaluk, which was the administrative region, westernmost administrative region in the Ottoman Empire. Near the time of annexation done by Austro-Hungary, which you can see on the right, Bosnia was also in the similar borders as it is now, bordering to Croatia, future to be Croatia, at the time part of also Austro-Hungarian Empire, with Banja Luka located here. Also during the Austro-Hungarian era, Banja Luka retained its position in Bosnian borders, and also didn't have any strategic nor administrative important administrative functions. I am outlining this because the buildings that we will see had important function in the religious context of the country itself. During the Yugoslav era, Bosnia and Herzegovina became the part of Yugoslavia, Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, sorry. And only in time after 1995, it became administrative center of entity named Republic of Srpska, which is also important for understanding this religious to national context of understanding the importance of the 3 buildings that I will show. This is in a mid-size scale present view of downtown of Banja Luka, and I would like to outline this street made in red, which is historically the oldest street in Banja Luka. It was once the old Solts Road connecting Salona and Servicium, which is on the south present day of Split. During the Roman era, this salts road was used to transport the salts from excavated and dried in the Mediterranean Sea to the northern provinces of Roman Empire, and Banja Luka was only one station on that road. That same road is preserved with its position and also important to say its importance to the town. So when you observe the functions of the buildings in Banja Luka, you will see all administrative, national administrative, public facilities, and also major religious buildings located along the same street. So here we have the mosque, Ferhat Pasha Mosque, that we will look closer today. On its northern part, we have the position of the cathedral, of Roman Catholic Cathedral, and in the middle, we have the position of Serbian Orthodox Cathedral Church. So that's why I started the speech with one street, one city, and three buildings along the same street. We will start with the oldest one. It is Ferhat Pasha Mosque, or the mosque built by Ferhat Pasha Sokolovic. It was built in 1579. The architect still remains, and something tells me that it will stay unknown in future, but we for sure know that it was the pupil of Mimar Sinan. Mimar Sinan was undoubtedly the most important architect of the Ottoman Empire, involved in not only sacred constructions, but also constructions of many different public buildings and facilities, ranging from palaces to bridges along the mosques. This mosque in Banja Luka was recognized as the National Cultural Heritage from 1915, which was the top level of recognition in Yugoslav law, and in the 70s it was already enlisted by UNESCO. Unfortunately, it was demolished during the civil war that was taking place in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 1992 to 1995. The demolition took place on 7th of May in 1993, and the whole building site, I will show you later, the extent of the building site was entirely demolished. Luckily, the demolished building parts, meaning the stones and some construction elements, were the representatives of the Muslim community managed to preserve and excavate them from the site and save them in a remotely located site outside the town, where they laid under the soil. So they were laid in the open ground and covered with soil, with dirt, basically, until the restoration works in the beginning of the 2001. The restoration was unfortunately aborted, and again started in 2007. It took place until 2016, with later being again recognized as a national monument of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I will show you the current state of the mosque, taking fairly small size of the building plot, with three grave monuments, one of them belonging to Ferhat Pasha himself. The part of the complex was also the clock tower located here on the right, that was also demolished in the 1993, but it never saw the reconstruction, so that we now have only this site with harem, meaning the yard of the mosque itself. When the demolition took place, the scenes were horrible. I managed to find only some color photos that I present here, so you can understand the extent of demolition of the building parts, and also to compare them to some project data that were drafted during the 90s. Unfortunately, the project data and the plans never existed in such a high detail that they would allow the exact reconstruction. So several years were needed in order to make some projects that were detailed enough to proceed to the construction itself. Here on the site plan, you can see the position of the mosque. Mosque itself it was built in the classical Ottoman architecture style that could have been be seen also in Istanbul at the time. So it was very much comparable to the contemporary architecture in the central parts of Ottoman Empire, with three turbe, meaning three grave buildings, graveyard buildings spread around the yard, and with the central shadrvan with the water spring for the religious procedure in the mosque. Here are other technical drawings. Those drawings were drafted by Professor Sabira Huceginovic, which was also the first one to be present at the site after the mosque collapsed. So she also took some additional drawings and technical specifications on those demolished building sites, which largely helped the architects to draft detailed projects afterwards. Here in the cross section, you can see the one main cupola. I also like to thank to Marcus for choosing the image of this cupola, of this dome, for the headline photo for the conference and the masterclass. So you might recognize it later. And here on the elevation plan, you can see three smaller domes in this frontal portico in front of the mosque itself. Some building parts were not originally placed there during the Ottoman time, but only after the Austro-Hungarians came, and some of those additions include this main portal, which has the Moorish revival or Orientalizing style details that you will see also in the photos afterwards. These are all contemporary photos now after the reconstruction. The reconstruction was done entirely using the same techniques, using the same technology, only the techniques, meaning the contemporary scaffolding and machines were newly introduced to the construction, but everything else, meaning the materials and also the parts of old mosque, were composed into the new building. On these photos, you can see those details. You can also recognize some of the older parts of the stone that were managed to that were retained from the original building, and this orientalized details that were also introduced during the Austro-Hungarian time. Inside, the reconstruction is done in original. Here is the inside part of the dome with original paintings, and also some detailed views just to illustrate you the level of details that were recognized from the original mosque and also transferred to the reconstructed version of present-day building, and other details inside. The second building that I'm showing you is the Cathedral Church of Saint Bonaventure, which is the main cathedral church in the administrative region of Banja Luka Bishopry. It was built in 1885, only 3 years after the ecclesial administration with the bishops was introduced in Bosnia. Until then, only the Franciscans were representatives of the Roman Catholic Church in Bosnia, which is very interesting and not very usual, at least in this part of Europe. However, in 1885, also during the Austro-Hungarian time and heavily supported by Austro-Hungarian court from Vienna, still unknown architect, very possibly one of the Trappist monks, Eberhard Wegnand, drafted a project for this church that we can see on left. Very often by local historians of architecture, it is recognized as the Gothic Revival architecture, and it is in the context of Bosnia, but if you put it in the context of Western European traditions in the late 19th century, it would be only, I would say, pale version of something that could be called Gothic Revival, only based on this pointed arched windows and portals. It was constructed by Nazar Kozak and unfortunately demolished due to a natural cause in 1969 during the earthquake that struck Banja Luka. It had fourfold cross-shaped outline in the floor plan, and in the elevation view it had very much similar features that could be compared to several other churches built by Austro-Hungarians in this part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is very interesting that also Professor Husejinovic managed to find these drawings in the archival source of National Archive of Bosnia and Herzegovina in Sarajevo. During the earthquake in 1969, more than 70% of buildings in Banja Luka got some damages. Some of those were really strong, and unfortunately the cathedral was one of those. So you can see here the extent of damages that according to the local administration offices were not repairable, so they ordered the destruction of the church in the following year. And unlike the other buildings that I'm showing you today, the the bishop and the local religious administration didn't choose to reconstruct the old building, but to construct completely new site with the construction starting in 1972, taking place only one year, and then the construction was continued in 1987 with bell tower added 1991. Vera Gazibara, female architect from Zagreb, was the author of the church, and Slovenian architect Danilo Fürst was the author of the bell tower. This construction received reconstruction in 2001, and the building itself, with the building site, is recognized also as the National Monument of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but as the part of the cityscape of the whole part of Banja Luka that I will show you later on. This cathedral church is one of the most disputable buildings in this post-war Banja Luka. It has this often recognized weird shape when it's observed by the foreigners, especially. But once you understand that this is the shape of the tents that were installed all across the town after the earthquake, because a lot of people needed the place to sleep over, then you can also understand why architects chose to connect the biblical tent, the image of biblical tent, with the tent again that was used in Banja Luka after the earthquake that damaged the original cathedral, and to use it as the background for new projects. This cathedral church is very important for context of Banja Luka, since it hosted Pope John Paul II, who also gifted this monument of Jesus to Banja Luka after his visitation to Banja Luka in 2001. And from this site, you can also from this view, you can probably see better this tent-shaped outline and remotely located bell tower built in 1991. On just the opposite side, there is Orthodox church with the seat of the Orthodox bishop, but this one was built in completely different context, so we will not relate to this architecture, even though it is very similar to the building that we will see on the next slides. Some other drone photos where you can understand and see also the strong use, heavily used raw concrete here and here, also relatable to the tradition of socialist architecture in the 70s and 80s, very often compared to the brutalism in Western European context. The last church, the last religious building that I'm showcasing you is the Serbian Orthodox Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity. It was built in 1922 to 1939 by architect Dusan Živanović, who was one of the most prominent pupils of Theophil Hansen school in Vienna, and also the member of the Hansekultur. Unfortunately, this building that is considered to be the last building built in Byzantine revival style in the former kingdom of Yugoslavia was demolished only 2 years after its final works that took place in 1941. We will see that this building that we have on site now was restored in 1993 with construction works taking place for more than 10 years by local architects Nebojša Balić and Rade Filipović. Original project was fortunately saved, and it was used in its full extent to be the background for the reconstruction that only changed one detail, but I will talk about that in a couple of minutes. Just to understand the context, that the church had the epicenter position between the two most important public facilities, the seat of mayor and the seat of city council inside the downtown. Here with the old, on the right, with the old Austro-Hungarian railway station. Its features, both inside and outside, were entirely according to Byzantine Revival fact sheet. So that's why it also had very important. It had very important position in the history of architecture, even beyond Bosnia and Herzegovina, reaching to the extent of Kingdom of Yugoslavia, especially because those two buildings that were surrounding the church were also done in the Byzantine Revival architecture, with especially with insignia of the old Kingdom of Yugoslavia. In 1941, after the strong air raid bombing done by Luftwaffe in the early April, the church was heavily damaged on its eastern side, with the apse wall almost entirely collapsed. You can see it here on the left and here on the right. And the local administration, also already influenced by the German officers, declared the building not repairable and ordered its full demolition. It took more than 50 years to start the reconstruction. Communist regime, after the demolition of the church, now we can see the present day shape of the church and the downtown. The communist regime ordered the erection of the monument devoted to the partisans and to the fallen members of the National Liberation Movement to be constructed on this very site. And it stood here until 1993, when the reconstruction started, when the monument was transferred. Here you can see it on the left. It is one really fairly small small monument located here on the very center of the foundations that were luckily preserved on site and used for new construction. I told that only one detail was changed in comparison to the old church. Its outer outline, its facade details are entirely according to the original project, and that detail that was changed is the composition of the outer walls that were originally built only only out of two layers. One layer was brick and the outer layer was stone masonry, and now we have three layers with outer masonry, inside 50 centimeters of reinforced concrete, and then again 1 layer of a brick wall, meaning that the space inside the church is slightly smaller because dimensions were offset inside. If you go inside this church, you will see that reconstruction is not completed so far. Only the decoration of the roof ceilings and the central dome is done. This is not painted decoration. That would be the second detail that was changed in comparison to the first church. This is all gold-plated mosaic that was placed inside the mortar. So you have here the view of the detail of the central dome. Here on the left, you can recognize the small pieces of mosaic. All other details like furnishing and central light source are in major according to the original view. In comparison to the original church, the gold-plated roof was added, and the original was done only in copper sheets of tin. And these would be the last views of this third building that I chose to close the presentation with. If we have time, I will just quickly address that those conditions that I presented here in these 3 buildings are pretty much similar to all sacred buildings that suffered some kind of demolition in last 100 or 150 years. Still, unfortunately, there are many cases where reconstruction still didn't take place, meaning that any kind of reconstruction haven't been done. In many cases, there are heavy use of misinterpretation and misuse of original projects, so that you have, so to say, fake or false projects being done on place. Is it fortunate or unfortunate? I would say that it is unfortunate. Mostly the reconstructions are done under control of religious communities, often not involving scientific committees or architects that have experience in these kind of reconstructions, and that also leads to this misinterpretation and misuse. However, religious buildings in Balkans, in Bosnia and Herzegovina especially, whether they were located or they are located in urban or in rural landscapes, they really define the urban culture and memory, and that's why their reconstruction is of utmost importance for the image of contemporary Bosnia and Herzegovina. Fortunately, many of those are recognized as national monuments of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has importance for their future treatment and current conservation steps. With this point, I would end the presentation and also ask the chair if the questions will take place now or afterwards. And I would like also to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Malinovic, for this interesting presentation. Do we have any questions? Yes, no? No. Thank you again. And last but not least, I would like to invite Mr. Thomas Albrecht, architect from Hilmer, Sattler und Albrecht Architekten from Berlin, to present the reconstruction of the Garrison Church in Potsdam. Thank you.
Sorry? Yeah. Yeah, we start with a hot film and the two lectures from Nazar Kozak and Anneli Randla reminded me very much to what you'll see next. And you will hear sound too, I hope. '68. That was the year when in Czechoslovakia the Dubček government reigned, and people in East Germany hoped that they would get a more liberalized Stalinism than before. And immediately the East German government blew up two churches, Garrison Church in Potsdam and University Church in Leipzig. Yeah. King Frederick Wilhelm I, the Soldatenkönig, the soldier king who never went to war, started the project on a huge Protestant garrison church in Potsdam, a royal military town south of Berlin, in the year 1730 till 1735 with the architect Philipp Gerlach. The church was later seen as a major work of Baroque in northern Germany. Here we see a painting of the 19th century. Garrison Church, which I can't believe, 300 soldiers for the Sunday prayer. And behind you see the Schloss of Potsdam, the castle. As the king and his father, Frederick II the Great, had been buried here at this place got a more important and dominant role, also in a secular sense. You all might know that it was then misused also as every place in Germany by Hitler and Hindenburg. Here's an aerial view on the left side. Okay. Here you see Garrison Church. Here you see the Schloss, and here you see the big exercise place for the army. Here the other church by Karl Friedrich von Schinkel. It was also the place where the flags of the besieged armies had been publicly presented. This is outside. You see it's a 90-meter tower, which is mainly seen from the road. You have windows which are 14 meters high. You have military symbols here on the outside, like Pyrenean arms reliefs and so on. And this is inside. This is the grave of Frederick the Great and Friedrich Wilhelm I. And here are the flags of the besieged armies, for example, for the armies of French army of Waterloo and all that stuff. So it turned from a church to a kind of a military Valhalla. Spatially, the church and especially the tower also served as an urban counterpart to the Potsdam Schloss and stood in an optical line with two other churches of Potsdam. Yeah, here you see again the church, the Schloss, and in between the parade place of Potsdam. And here you see a photo which was done before the Second World War, that the three churches of Potsdam could be seen in a line, a very nice idea of Baroque urban design. A famous clarion gave the church an acoustical dimension too. Demolished in 1945, in the last days of World War II, and finally blown up in 1968, which we have seen, there has always been a silent wish of rebuilding this important and missing structure of the inner city of Potsdam. In 2011, we won the competition for the first part of reconstruction, the tower and its adjacent structure, 90 meters high. So this is the part which is now being rebuilt. It's 42 meters, and this dimension is 12 meters. And the dark part, the dark line, is how we reconstructed in brick. So in the first construction, there were 4 pillars of brick, 8.5 by 8.5 meters, 1, 2, 3, 4. And nowadays, with modern engineering and civil engineering, we have walls which are only 3.5 meters thick. So we gain this space here. Our competition team, including a structural engineer, had the idea to stay as close as possible to the original materials. So we choose brick as the main building material. This resulted what it is now, with load-bearing walls of 3.5 meters thickness, the highest brick building in Europe since more than 100 years. The brick structure is 65 meters high. So this is the Hassenpflug painting we see, and this is what we are reconstructing now. This is a section which shows the old and the new building. The old building is the rosé structure. You see the walls were here 8 meters, and the new is the red color, where the walls are 3.5 and up here 2 meters. The ceilings are all done in concrete. You now ask, why don't you do the ceilings also in wood as it has been done before? The reason is we have a platform here looking over the city, which is in a height of 65 meters. And this is a public building. All the ceilings have to be fireproof for 3 hours. And that has the result that these walls, these ceilings all have to be done in concrete. The following programming was given in the competition: working as a service tower as before for the future ship which will come later. In the ground floor, visible a modern chapel, which is here. You see it later in a perspective. A small conference center with a library here. A small museum of 300 square meters, and a viewpoint, as I said, 65 meters high, with an elevator for everyone to get up easily. The budget of 40 million euros comes half from private persons, half from the German government. The planning started in 2011. Building process began in 2017. Next May, our Bundespräsident Steinmeier will inaugurate it. At that time, the last 25 meters will still be missing. They will be added in spring 2026. This is the modern chapel we have inside the tower, which results that the walls are now much smaller than before. And we wanted to have this chapel to be from the first second visible as a modern inner chapel, and not as a romantic thing which might come from the 18th century. It is very small. It's only 160 square meters. One question Marcus asked, and I take it up: how can the reconstruction of historic cathedrals can be explained? In East Germany, the DDR, demolition was, sadly to say, a typical tool of urban design, which was applied to extinguish former feudalist and capitalist castles and churches. We heard that before today, just because of political or ideological reasons. Second, it was nearly impossible to do reconstruction work as there was always a severe lack of trained handicraft people, Handwerker, which also resulted of political reasons. But in the end of October 1990, only 3 weeks after reunification, the city parliament of Potsdam, democratically elected, expressed the explicit will to, I quote, rebuild the historic center of Potsdam in best possible way as a long-term project. The buildings should then last for centuries. This is how it looks today. This step was done, this demand, because there was a huge fury in the population of East Germany directly after the fall of the wall and after reunification, to bring back the worldwide known beauty of this famous city in its inner center, including the Garnisonkirche, and secondly, to strengthen the suppressed church after the revolution of 1989, in which the Protestant church played a major role. This resulted in the so-called B-Plan #1. So this is the demands which I quoted of the city parliament. And this is the B-Plan #1. This is very interesting. So this was the former center of Potsdam, which was completely destroyed with the exception of this church here by Karl Friedrich von Schinkel and the Majory here. And it was partly destroyed. This was blown up, the garrison church. And as I said, there was the political will of all parties in the city parliament to redo this center, which includes to rebuild the castle, which houses now the Parliament of Brandenburg, to rebuild the Barberini Museum here, to rebuild this whole thing, and to rebuild this whole quarter of original houses. It is the idea of the so-called critical reconstruction, that you follow the street line, the former street lines, follow the former heights. You put modern buildings which apply to all these rules. In contrast is to historic buildings. So all the major urban points like these corners here and here, the Barberini and here and the Garrison Church, they have to be reconstructed in full detail. And in the B plan, it was even demanded that the detailing of the architects have to be shown to the city authorities, and that these facades have to be really precious. You couldn't make plastic insulation and plastic windows. That was the very severe demanding of the city. Another reason why the city of Potsdam wanted to have such a, you may say, retro look might be the idea or the sentence of the very well-known German Egyptologist Aleida Assmann. She says, "Today we have more confidence in the past than in the future." I like this sentence very much. Is the a question of Marcus, is the reconstruction exact replication or are there differences? Answer, the legal conditions of a public building are always changing in modern societies. That means there are always improvements in the designs of stairs, elevators, but also in the aspects of structure and fire protection. That means, yes, we can redo certain rooms, but never the whole floor plan. I give you an example. In the beginning of the 20th century, the tower of San Marcos in Venice collapsed. Nobody was hurt because it happened at night. And they rebuilt it completely with any other changing in the outside, but inside it's a steel structure and it's an elevator. Also at that very time, it was the high time of high rises in Chicago and New York. So they said, no, we stay to the old thing. So in our case, Garnisonkirche, the outside form is absolutely correct. So to the centimeters. In 1928, there has been a very detailed refurbishment of the church, And while this work was done, the building was documented and photographed precisely. This was the leading path for our final drawings and models of the limestone work. There's only one point which was put anew in the facades. From the typos of the letters, you can easily see that this is a modern element, a religious writing in the socola in 5 different languages. This is not a photo, it's a CID drawing. Question by Marcus: is it a reconstruction, a restoration, or rather a transformation in both use and meaning of the historic building? What does reconstruction mean? Outside. It is a reconstruction in our case. This can be done in 3 different ways. A reconstruction can be done as a hybrid. For example, the Berlin Schloss, which has explicit modern parts here and explicit modern parts here and explicit historic parts, which merge together, but which have a clear line of division. You can do an exact reconstruction like the Palazzo Barberini, which is only a few hundred meters of Garrison Church. And you can do an in-between solution like the also blown up church Universitätskirche in Leipzig, which here is a semi-modern, semi-Gothic form. We choose, or we had to choose, the Garnisonkirche in the dialogue with the client to do an absolute perfect reconstruction outside. Inside, it is a transformation. I showed you the former building just contained two staircases and rooms of minor importance. Now we have again 2 staircases. We have 2 elevators, a modern chapel, conference center, small museum, and viewpoint in 65 meters high. Question: in what way does its function as a religion building has influence in the restoration project? Are there conflicts between user and restorer? Answer: in our case, the client wanted explicitly the new functions. In the original building, there was no sacrificial space in the footprint of the tower. Now there is, because nowadays we can calculate the behavior of brick, and by that we can reduce the thickness of the 4 pillars from 8 to 3.5 meters, and by that to form an additional chapel. But by that we leave the path of original rebuilding in the inner part of the building. Here's again a section which shows the different uses: the chapel, adjacent rooms, conference center, museum, library, and here the platform. 5. Question: to what extent do the Athens and Venice charters influence restoration? Answer: the whole rebuilding of the inner center of Potsdam, the whole B plan number 1, which you have seen, is in a certain way a direct result of these 2 important charters. Although, since we worked there and the start was in 2011, these papers have never been mentioned. Materials. Yeah, this is how it looked last week, 65 meters high. The last 25 meters are still missing. So in the very end, it will end up here. So the scaffolding has been taken away. This will be taken away next week. And so we have the structure. Materials. In the last 15 years, our office had the privilege to do 3 major reconstructions: the Schloss in Berlin, the Museum Barberini in Potsdam, and the Garrison Church. We decided to use the original materials as often as possible. Red, massive brick. You see here we have these wonderful subconstructions in wood like the Romans had. Limes, this is the upper part of the tower. When you look up and you see these steel staircases, which are not finished yet. We have personally engraved bricks which help to finance the building. You can buy a stone, put them in, and you will forever be visible with your name for the people climbing up the stair. We used limestone. This is model, a full-size model of a sculpture, which will then hang in 12 meters height. This is a huge relief of 100 square meters, which is finished now. It consists of 10 parts laying in the yard of the stone factory. We used mineral plaster. This is mineral plaster. Mineral plaster. We use wooden windows as before, 14 meters high, windows in 2 layers, outside, inside. We use metal sheets and normal glass. Question: how are historic religious buildings rebuilt today? What are the reasons? I can only speak for my country. When a reconstruction is done, the money mostly comes from private individuals, at least for the parts of reconstruction. And all these peoples are, as far as I know them personally, only to convince to give the money with an exact replica of a historic form. That does not mean that parts of these buildings can be modern, like the Schloss. But the whole building can still be seen as a hybrid, but only historic forms attract the money, to make the story short. Please do not forget, there is the same tendency in German city centers, Potsdam, Berlin, Frankfurt, and Dresden, to reconstruct historic places, markets, towers, city centers, not only churches. For example, this is the Neue Markt, the center of the B-Plan #1, with the newly constructed Schloss, which is the parliament, which was not there. It was no single brick. Barberini, the other buildings, this was redone completely. This is the city center of Berlin now with the Berlin Schloss. This is the city center of Frankfurt am Main, which is also completely new. And this is the we talked about it today, the completely, or to 85% redone Frauenkirche in Dresden. And these buildings, they are all completely new. Please do not forget. In the case of Dresden, it was even explicitly expressed to have again the perspective of Canaletto. There was called, we want back the Canaletto Blick, the Canaletto view. You know, Canaletto was a painter of the 18th century who used a kind of a camera obscura. This is why his paintings are so perfect. This is the Frauenkirche, this is the Hofkirche, which was not destroyed. And this is how Dresden looks now. And this is how the Canaletto Blick is produced. I mean, it was the explicit democratic will of people of Dresden, so I tolerate it. 7th point and finishing point, opposition. Naturally, not all people in Potsdam welcome the reconstruction of the Garrison Church, but in my view, a big majority likes the project. But let me talk as an architect who is working here since 35 years. And this is my very personal opinion and experience. Every project nowadays evokes discussion and opposition in different forms. This is a vivid form of our society and our democracy. It always happens whether you plan social housing or 5-star housing, a power station or a hotel, a museum, a railway station, or a subway entrance. Every project, in Germany has opposition. We have a culture of discussion, but also of resentment. All 4 projects of the refurbishment of the inner city, which I have shown you before, had that very theme. But finally, and this seems to me the most important point, all these decisions have been made absolutely democratically. I very often speak personally to people which are enthusiastic about the results of these new urban contexts. Sometimes they have tears in their eyes and they say, Why did we have to wait so long to see this beauty again? Why did you architects build such a nonsense for such a long time? You knew it was wrong, don't you? This is really true. I got this sentence. All the projects in Germany, explicitly, all of them, every single, underwent a fair and democratic approval by any form of parliament. Berlin, the city where I live and work, underwent 2 dictatorships in the 20th century. You still can see the effects of decisions which had been made without any democratic process. I'm very happy to work in a democracy, and within this wonderful governmental system, it is necessary to tolerate a different opinion after democracy has decided. Thank you.
Well, that was another fascinating session. Are there any questions? We had planned a discussion, but I think all of our talks were a bit longer, or at times much longer, which I think that is because we're all rather passionate about this topic, or the speakers are passionate about what they do, about reconstruction, about this type of architecture, and we all have lots to say, lots to tell, and 20 minutes is far too little to say everything that we want. Anyway, are there any questions now? Or in the room? No? In the chat? No questions? What is that? Yes. No questions? Shall we have a discussion in this room today, now, here, or shall we have a reception first and have a discussion during the reception? Both. Excellent. Yes. Okay, let's do that. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you all people online watching this, and we'll be back tomorrow at 9. Thank you.